Hello. So this video is going to be a little bit different. Um, this video is going to be part of a series, the first video in the series actually, called The Way I See It. And I want this series to be about, in essence, well, the way I see how the maps are played. Now, just by the name of the series title, this is how I see the map, how the maps are played. It's not how Razman sees it, how Nictoman, Putin, Balanced, Krot, or whomever sees how the maps are played. It's my personal opinions, and you will obviously find people who will disagree with me on certain parts, and that's fine. I just wanted to provide this knowledge, especially with Warno around the corner, um, as a way to just broadcast what my opinions are. It's maybe help some people understand the maps better. And what I want to do is I want to start off with the maps that are, in my opinion, the simplest, and use the concepts that we learn in the simple maps to build up to the more complex maps like Punch Bowl, Nuclear Winter, and Highway. So, with that out of the way, let's define some terms for us that I'll be trying to use throughout the entire video series um, to describe, in essence, how I think about the maps. And the first term that I'm going to talk about is this idea of locality. I want to have locality, in essence, be this definition. Locality is an area of the map that's not the whole map, where some sort of organized combat takes place. And we're free to make this area as small or as big as we want. So, for example, one locality could be Dick Forest right here. Um, and that's perfectly fine to talk about, but maybe you want to specifically talk about the balls of Dick Forest right here. Um, and that could also be a considered locality. So really, the definition of locality, or rather the practical use case of it, is very much up to the user, if you will. Um, and you could also make it as big or as small as you want. So for example, like this little tree line right here, this little patch of trees could be a locality, but from a practical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to talk about this area right here because no one really is going to talk about this area specifically. They'll be talking about this whole entire patch of trees. So that's sort of what a locality is. And the idea is that the map is divided up into certain localities that make sense to actually talk about and to understand, and understand how they work. And with that, we sort of motivated this idea of local strategy. Local strategy, in essence, is strategy used in playing in a locality in an organized way. So you could have strategy for playing Triangle Forest, for example, from this side or from this side. You could have strategy for playing Square Forest, Dick Forest, Factory Town, or what have you. And then the necessary counterpart to local strategy will be global strategy. And global strategy is in essence going to be the combination of local strategies. This global strategy is going to be combining local strategies together in order to play the whole map in some sort of organized way. So, for example, you could say, well, I know how to play Triangle Forest, I know how to play Square Forest. I want to develop some sort of long-term plan based off of how these how these local strategies turn out. And global strategies, in essence, is going to be guiding your whole entire game plan. And that's going to lead to things which we'll talk about later, like the Triangle Forest plan or the Square Push, and the typical strategies and games that follow from those. And to put micro in this perspective, I'm defining micro as, in essence, the execution of local strategy. So your micro would be how well you can do the Triangle Forest attack, or how well you can push the two-pointer, stuff like that. And it's a pretty broad term. I don't want to talk about micro here that much. I want to talk about strategy. So I'm not going to go into the types of micro that you can do and the types of like tank micro, infantry micro, and all that stuff. That's not the purpose of this video. That can be for other videos, and it's a whole nother discussion. And from these ideas of locality and globalness, the idea of actually rotation and force composition and force distribution fall out pretty nicely from these definitions. So, rotation in essence is moving units from one locality to another. And again, you can define, because of how we define locality, you could say that moving my Amex 10 from here to this position right here is a rotation. And while by definition you may be correct, at least for how I've defined it, practically speaking, it just doesn't make sense to talk about the game that way because that's not how really anybody thinks. Um, a rotation, though, that's would be more practically understood, be rotating this Amex 10 right here from triangle forest into square forest, or square forest to triangle forest. That would be some sort of rotation. And it's going to give us this very flexible framework to talk about, in essence, more maps than just Paddy Field. With that in mind, forest composition, in essence, is the combination of units across all tabs, or in a deck, present in a specific locality. So our force composition is going to include things like recon, tanks, infantry, helos, planes, all that good type of stuff. And force composition is contained in some sort of locality right here. It doesn't generally make sense to talk about force composition across the entire map. Maybe if you're talking about AA, but its force composition is more of a local concept as opposed to a global one. Um, and then within a specific locality, you can have a distribution of forces, which is going to be force distribution. So a force distribution will be the distribution of a force composition across a locality. So for example, it could be the order relative to your opponent's spawn in which AA and infantry is placed. So if my AA is in front of my infantry, for example, and in front of my tanks as well, that probably isn't the greatest force distribution of all time. But if my infantry is in front of my transports and my other tanks and all that good type of stuff, and my AA is in the back, and my recon's out in front as well, that's going to be probably be some better force distribution. And the last two concepts I want to define are these ideas of functioning and non-functioning recon. Functioning recon is recon that's placed in some sort of capable position that can spot opposition forces. And by capable position, I mean like something that's going to actually do stuff. So, like for example, if your recon, like this AMX turret here, is instead placed in the middle of a forest. So if you just back up a little bit to here, if we're in this position right here, you see that we're not really that capable. We're not really that functioning because the areas which we may want to spot over here, we can't because there's too much forest in the way. And the same story for this side over here. And for spotting here, we're not even doing a very good job of it, as you can see. So this would be some sort of non-functioning recon. It's not really doing all that much. And non-functioning recon is basically recon that's just not functioning recon. So this AMX-10 right here is non-functioning, but all of a sudden, if we move into this position right here, we now have functioning recon, because we can spot into here, we can shoot, we can hit this road, and we can even hit this road right here. So that's an example of functioning recon and non-functioning recon. And these 8 definitions, these 8 definitions are going to be how I will in general think about maps and how I play maps. And in essence, how the basic fundamentals by which I build up local and then global strategies, which is the goal of this series. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to basically talk about the local strategies of a certain locality, and we'll go place by place along the map so that we cover everything that's relevant. And then after understanding these localities and hopefully understanding how they actually interact with each other, we can start to build these global strategies, global plans on how to play the game in a dynamic and flexible way. Because after all, if you play like if you only know how to do the triangle forest attack, for example, from both sides, and all of a sudden your triangle forest attack doesn't work very well, you're out of that game plan and you don't know what to do. And it's one thing when someone says go attack some other place and go apply pressure, but actually understanding how to do that and what the end goals are at that point, That's a little bit harder. So the goal by the end of this video is to reach that sort of level of understanding on a map like Paddy Field. So with that in mind, um, I'm going to start by talking about Factory Town. And Factory Town is this locality right here. And I'm going to talk about, in essence, the two other localities it influences, which are kind of these forests right here along with this town. And then these town blocks right here and this forest right here. So, Factory Town is this town right here. Both sides can reach this in the opener. Delta and Echo. And in essence, the goal of Factory Town, the reason why we care about Factory Town in the first place, is to control this locality here or this locality here, depending on our side. So, along with Factory Town specifically, there's really not that much to it. It's just a town block. Most of these towns, as you can see right here, are connected and touching each other, so that makes the micro pretty easy. But you can see that for certain areas, like from this town block to this town block right here, and from here to here, there are a couple little gaps. So that can be has to be something to watch out for. Really though, with Factory Town, it's not that interesting of a locality to talk about, simply because it's just used for gaining control of other places. If you want to gain control back into Factory Town from the Delta side, for example, you typically store like fire support here, and then you walk in, and then you enter into some sort of boring town fight, which I'm not that concerned about. If you want to gain control of Factory Town from the Echo spawn, it's going to be a little bit harder, but in essence, you try to build up some fire support, and you try to get back into these towns right here. Maybe you can put your fire support like here or here, or you can come out from this angle right here, but it's generally a little bit harder. In essence, though, Factory Town's not that interesting, but the interesting part is this area and this area right here. So for these forests right here across the river, these areas right here are really interesting because of how they actually impact the supply roads for Delta spawn. Now, if we notice with this AMX 10 right here, just to give an example, in this locality, this AMX 10 right here hits this road like this. And this is one of my favorite spots in this map. Because if you have, like, for example, an M3A2 Bradley, you actually hit way farther over to here. So this AMX 10 controls this road right here, which is really going to help us in controlling other localities. Additionally, you also have a tiny little sliver right here, as you can see, which you can side shot stuff traveling down this road. And if you have a Bradley or some sort of ATGM type of vehicle with relatively fast ATGMs, you can hit even further down. So this is just one spot. There are a couple of others. Like with this AMX right here, for example, if we move it a little bit up right here, just speeding this up, you can see that this area across the forest is going to control this open area right here. So we get nice shots everywhere, and it makes it very hard for the enemy to store units in this area. We also have this bush right here, where you can clearly store units and recon. And we also have this bush right here. Now, this town right here generally doesn't come into play, but it's gonna help you in essence store infantry, and other units. It doesn't come into play all that much from the Echo side because it's just very hard to get units here. But if you can get enough units this far and your opponent just doesn't do anything, then this locality now actually influences the spawn, because you can put units here, just basically rear shot, as you can see, the spawn's right here, to rear shot spawning units, and if you have AA, you can put AA here as well to hopefully hit spawning helicopters or spawning planes. This is incredibly rare though, because most people who have a modicum of skill usually do something about it at this point. And I think in all the games I played, I've only had one game where this ever came up, and it was completely my fault that I let this happen. So that's what these forests right here do. There are a bunch of little funny spots like this one with right here, here, and here that allow you to influence this road right here. So the whole purpose of this locality, and for playing it, from this side at least, is to, in essence, hit this road and this road right here. Now, from this side, this forest, is not really going to be doing all that much for you, other than making sure your opponent can't put stuff there. It really is, in essence, a vehicle to either retake Factory Town, or just make sure that everything here is safe. So as I alluded to earlier, if you want to retake Factory Town, putting some sort of fire support in these positions can be a good idea to retake Factory Town. But really, the prize jewel of the Delta side right here for why we care about Factory Town are the spots where these two AMX 10s are. So first, let's move this AMX 10 back and talk about this sort of general locality right here, composing of this tree line here, this forest here, and this right here. This AMX 10 right here, as you see, we have line of sight on enemy units right here, and just a tad bit, as you can see, into this tree line right here. It's not as useful as these two spots are here, but it is a spot. And if we go out a little bit farther, you can see that the line of sight is going to get a little bit better. Now, putting like a Verkenning here, for example, or some sort of other recon tank is always a good thing, if you can manage it. Because it's going to make it very hard for the Echo side to actually reinforce. This AMX 10 right here, if you put like an ATGM or an AMX 10 right here, does the exact same thing, but just better. Because now we have rear or side shots into this tree line right here, and all along this road, as you can see. It makes it very hard for the opponent to do stuff. You're also going to spot into this tree line right here, so this right here would be an example of functioning recon. This AMX 10 right here is in essence the ultimate example of what we can do by taking advantage of this locality right here. With this AMX 10, we hit this road all along it, and we can hit just a bit into this tree line here as well. Now, if we have good optics, sometimes, but mostly very good, and we put our recon into right here, which is a highly, highly functioning spot. If we go a little bit more, please. So at the very edge of this forest, like right here, for example, you'll actually be able to spot into here, as you can see. You won't be spotting recon units, but things with like poor stealth, for example, you'll spot those. So the purpose really from this side against a competent opponent is to, in essence, put zoning material right here to make continued reinforcements to this locality, otherwise known as Triangle Forest, harder. And yeah, you'll get side shots and stuff like that, but a competent opponent will try to deal with this relatively soon, because if they don't, and this area is secured, it's virtually impossible to get back into Foxtrot. And that's a bit more of a global comment, but we'll come back to that. So, we've sort of discussed this locality right here, Factory Town, and these sort of across the river forests, if you will. The next logical place to talk about is Triangle Forest. Now, Triangle Forest is interesting from both sides, because while it looks simple, it is deceptively hard to micro. Just because the local strategy demands so many intricate little details, if you will. So, When I look at rookie gameplay or even train gameplay, the most common mistake I see among those people when doing a triangle attack, at least from the Delta side, is attacking triangle, um, actually not attacking the triangle force itself, but trying to attack the tank positions right here. And the reason why that can be hard is because if they're Legion 90 in here, for just talking concretely, you may get side shot. So you have to, so in essence, deal with this triangle forest. Now, from this side right here, we can see that the line size can be a little bit wonky. If we go all the way in the back right here with the same X10, I'm just going to keep this on very fast, just to speed things up. You can see that our line of sight, we don't quite reach this road right here, where tanks would typically be stored, but we reach only to about here, 1600 or so. And it's very narrow. So if somebody tries to just walk infantry just straight like that, you may end up in a situation right here where you're able to shoot their infantry, but their tanks, which are in this area, more or less, if they're doing things correctly, won't be able to shoot at you. If we move up a tiny bit more again, all of a sudden the line sight is going to improve a lot more. We can just shoot a little bit farther, as you can see, but it's still more or less the same story. And if we go a little bit more again to right here, same thing. The reason why this is happening is because the fact that we're in a forest already, plus we're shooting through this little thin strip of forest, which if I remember correctly is about 100 meters. Let's see. 972, 1,000 something. So yeah, it's good. It's a little bit less than 100 meters. The combination of those two things is going to make it very difficult for you to actually gain full line of sight when you're farther back, which makes this actually a very powerful location because it based in essence forces the opponent to push into you as opposed to you pushing into the opponent. So if you play this area a little bit more patiently, you are going to find that you'll get a lot of free kills on units. If we go up a little bit more to here, you can see that all of a sudden that starts to disappear and we start to gain a lot more line of sight onto everything. And then even further over to here, we in essence are going to have, as far as relevant line of sight goes, full relevant line of sight. So this little thin strip of forest is pretty powerful, and an opponent who knows how to use this will make a huge advantage out of it. Because if you notice, we go all the way back to here, to this area, behind it, we have our line of sight cut even more, and even if we go farther back, we still have our line of sight cut. So in essence, what you can do is if you just play this area, you go in and out of this forest backwards, like that. So go here, go back, and do that again and again. You'll find that you have the opportunity to shoot your opponent's units, and they just can't shoot at you. And they may even have a hard time, if they don't have a recon helo in this area specifically, actually gaining sight on you. And that can make it quite frustrating to play against. Now, from the other side, the line of sight is also a little bit weird. If we try to take our tank right here, so this an AMX-10, which is what I'm using as an example, if we try to take this tank, you can see that that the line of sight actually into the triangle force itself is a little bit weird. And that's because we have these little forests right here, which do a very good job of obscuring vision. But if we fast move a tiny bit to here, our line sight's going to be a little bit better, as you can see. So you have to keep in mind your location, your relative location to these little forest blocks right here with this tank. And that means that if you try to push into Triangle Forest from way too far out, you're going to have a very hard time actually leveraging your fire support. Because if your opponent's right here, yeah, you will shoot them. But if they're playing a little bit farther back into this area, you're going to have a hard time. And as you can see, going closer is not necessarily going to directly solve this problem. So clearly something's up right here. And if we kind of use this power line as reference, um, staying on the left side of this power line is not going to do us any great favors. So if we move a little bit to the right here, and we try to use our fire support here now, and we get closer, all of a sudden, we're in the clear. That's just because this area right here is completely empty and has no forest. So we only have this little tree line here, and then the tree line itself in the triangle forest to deal with. Now, returning to this little strip of forest right here in the triangle forest locality, you may think just naively that, oh, this should be in a range, I should be able to shoot. And as you can see here, you can shoot this area of the strip of forest right here. Sort of okay, not that great. But the second you start to go closer to where the AMX-10 is, the line of sight drops off remarkably quickly, as you can see. And that's just because we have this tree line right here, this tree line right here, and the little patches of trees right here. So if we try to actually push the triangle forest area in between these two power lines, we're not going to be in for a good time. Because we're just not ever going to be able to get line of sight on this position right here, and it's just going to be very hard. If you notice, though, the further we move towards this power line right here, or this steel box, not sure what the word is, we're going to get a lot better line of sight. We don't quite have line of sight on where this AMX-10 is, but we're very, very, very close, as you can see. Now, if we push forward just a tad bit, you'll see that all of a sudden, our line of sight is much better. So, using this sort of, I don't know what the word is. I'm just going to call it steel boxes, I guess. Steel box as a reference, staying by this is a good idea. If you go a little bit to the right, our line of sight will also be perfectly fine as well. Right here, we have nice line of sight, as you can see. So in essence, the further to the right we go, the more intuitive the line of sight becomes. And the further to the left we go, the less intuitive the line of sight is. So that right there is, in essence, our guiding principle for tank micro, at least, or or more explicitly, the execution of local strategy from this side. So our local strategy could be, maybe I want to get my tanks here, or I want to play this funny line of sight here. But we haven't actually discussed the triangle forest itself yet, which is the whole point. Now, the triangle forest is actually a very tricky place, because as you can see, you can play with line of sight very easily. And if we go forward a little bit with this AMX-10 right here, we now have side shots. So from the Echo Spawn player can play with their fire support, on the line of sight of their fire support very nicely, just by going a tiny bit in and out of the forest to make it such that the fire support can shoot at incoming infantry, while the enemy fire support can't shoot back. And that's a really powerful thing, because you're in essence forcing the opponent to come closer. And that's a big deal. So, why is a triangle forest itself important, and why is this called why is the so-called triangle forest attack called the triangle forest attack? Well, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that our local strategy is to push the tanks out right here by driving into them. So we're going this way right here. And if the Echo Spawn player feels outmatched, they're going to start retreating. And as you can see, we can't hit them, even past this steel box right here. So if we keep on trying to drive closer, we still can't touch them. Now, if we try to chase the AMX-10 down, what's going to happen is now we're showing side, as you can see, to Triangle Forest. So if we want to have any hope of actually controlling this locality, we need to deal with the Triangle Forest itself. It is not enough to try to push the tanks out from here, because a skilled player will make you lose your tanks and will make you lose all of your units if you try to do that. So the local strategy that is tried, true, and tested for Triangle Forest, in essence, goes like this. From the Delta side, we want to actually put infantry into the Triangle Forest itself. Ideally, some sort of high-quality infantry, like Legion 90, Panzergrenz, VDV, good stuff like that. Because if we have Legion 90 right here, we move them up a tad bit, what's going to happen is we're going to start hitting this little strip of forest right here. And if we go just even a little bit more, you'll notice we're going to have full line of sight through the forest. And this is a really big deal because that means that our opponents can't use this incredibly strong spot for triangle. So if we get our high quality infantry right here, then we're going to start pushing our opponent's tanks out, and we know Triangle Forest is clear. So what that means is that we can now move our AMX-10 up through the gap right here safely. And all of a sudden, once we cross this tree line right here, then we have full line of sight. And he can't run anymore. And that's a big deal. So in essence, our goal is to control Triangle Forest, move our tanks up, and then cut off his retreating tanks and kill them. That is the local strategy for Triangle Forest right here. And the line of sight can be a little bit wonky, as we just saw, so you have to keep that in mind. So now makes sense to talk about the local strategy of Triangle Forest from the Echo Spawn. Our local strategy, in essence, is going to boil down to really two cases. Case one of if our opponent actually has units in Triangle Forest area, the Triangle Forest locality. So, like, if this area is being occupied by our opponent. So, like, does our opponent have an AMX-10 here? Are they trying to actually push Triangle Forest? That's case one. Case two is our opponent has actually nothing here. Case two is not the concern of local strategy. It's more of a global thing because it's talking about how different localities interact. So I'll come back to case two once we start talking about global strategy. In the case of local strategy, though, our goal in essence is to remove the opponent's tanks right here. Because if our opponent has no tanks right here, then presumably any residual infantry, AA, or units in general that they have here will die pretty quickly. Because we can always push up through this. Because as we saw earlier, the line of sight just gets better and better and better the farther up we move. And we can ideally chase our opponent's units down. So the first and foremost thing we want to do is we want to maintain control of Triangle Forest. Because if we don't, our opponent will take it if they know what they're doing. And it's always a good assumption to assume that our opponents know what they're doing. Because if we didn't, we'd be fools. So if we have Triangle Forest right here, we can in essence stop our opponent from pushing infantry into the Triangle Forest area. We can position our VABs in certain locations, our Legion in certain locations. We can turn off the mini-me if we want. Our VABs right here get some nice line of sight, or we could be a little bit more funny and we could pull back a tiny bit. And you can see that we now only have partial line of sight, which is what we're looking for. Because that means we can shoot our opponent's infantry, but they can't shoot at us. So our goal, our local strategy here is to make sure that we maintain triangle force control and that he can't push in. Now, our tank strategy is to remove his tanks. That's the whole idea, because if his tanks have been removed, we can exit the local strategy and move on to more global things. So, the typical places we place our tank are in this area right here, and also this area, which we'll talk about in just a second. If we move out of the OP spot right here, and I'm just going to reverse a tiny bit back, you can see that our line of sight is not nearly as nice as it used to be. Like, it's still pretty okay. But our opponent can really play with the line of sight here. So our opponent doesn't have to worry about us playing with the line of sight as much. So, in essence, what I do is I try to push forward right here, like this, if I actually want to do some sort of aggressive thing, because I want to push into my opponent's tanks and I want to kill them. I go back right here if I want to get some sneaky free shots off on my opponent's infantry that they can't do anything about. That's sort of how my local strategy is going to be working from this side right here. Now I mentioned this spot right here. This spot has really no funny line of sight because from here to here, this area to this area, it's just completely open. But what this spot can be good for is if we use it in conjunction with this right here. Because now our opponent has to micro against two angles. And that's from a micro perspective, not from a local strategy perspective, but from a micro perspective, that's hard to do. Because I can have my tanks here shooting his infantry and pushing forward with aggressive tendencies, and I can have my tank here as well. So, just speaking concretely as the USSR, maybe I'll put like a double or triple stack of BMP3s right here, because the Arcans will do a very good job of pushing my opponent back and allowing me to play more aggressively with my tanks that will be right here. So this can be a good spot for like supporting tanks or your main tank, depending on how you actually construct your force composition and how you actually want to distribute it. That's very much a play style thing. Now, one of the questions that may pop into your head is, okay, Lord Pi, if I can't push forward into my opponent's tanks and they're not really doing anything, they're spooling up, how do I counter that? Well, if you have MLRS, for example, so LRM, Oregon, all those good types of funny units, and you see them just sitting here doing nothing, what you can do is you can hit them with MLRS, and then you can push into them and try to drive them out. And that's an aggressive tendency, so you know you'd move your tank forward. So that's what you do from the Echo side if your opponent isn't really doing much. Now, as far as smoking goes, smoking in this map is pretty interesting. If you smoke from the Echo side, if you smoke behind right here, I should actually get a mortar to demonstrate this. Anyway, if you smoke behind right here, you now have a hard line of sight blocker on top of the already really good line of sight blocker you have right here. And that can be really strong. You don't even need smoke, honestly, to execute this, but it can help against AT-GEM planes, of course, and if your opponent has a recon helo. So that's a place to smoke. If you smoke in front, which you can do, one thing you have to keep in mind is that you will no longer be able to use all the really fancy line of sight here, and the battle will turn less into a battle determined by nice positioning relative to the terrain, and more just straight tank micro in and out of smoke and stuff like that. And if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But this is a very important. This is a very really nice spot, and it can't hurt to give it up. So you can see right here, if we smoke like behind, like this, I'll just keep this sped up. We can now shoot here, and if we see him coming towards us, we can just retreat and we have a hard line of sight blocker. And that can make it very difficult for him to actually know where we are. Because we could be right here, for example, and he may not see us. So, because of just how amazing the line of sight is right here, as you can see once again. So that's a consideration. The next place that people commonly smoke on this side is this little spot right here. And jumping a little bit ahead to global strategy, if you will, this spot right here is going to block ATGMs from this position and from this position, so that's always nice. But also, if you notice, with the smoke right here, the line, he in essence has no line of sight on me that he can reasonably get to. And that's going to actually give us the opportunity to cross, potentially, depending on where his tanks are, of course, safely into Triangle Forest. So it can allow us to very unexpectedly move fire support across the open without really putting it in an obvious way, if you will, where we're moving it to, into Triangle Forest. And now there's a surprise super heavy at close range, which can be very lethal. So that's a common spot to smoke. And of course, if you want to push in this area right here, you can always smoke this spot for your BMP3s, your super heavy, or your whatever. So, just speaking concretely here, maybe the way you want to distribute your forces is you have like an M84AN in this area right here if you're playing like Entente, and a super heavy right here. That can be very hard for your opponent to deal with, because if they try to push into you right here, they're going to start to get hit, depending on, of course, your positioning in the locality. So that's a big deal. Now, from this side right here, the smoking is less precise in regards to like smoking behind versus in front here. We don't have that sort of distinction anymore. We more or less have the distinction of, okay, I'm going to make some sort of giant smoke cloud right here, so we'll just speed this up. And I'm going to play in and out of the smoke cloud to fight this position right here, being wary, of course, of the Triangle Forest right here. And, you know, you can move in and out like that, and that's fine. Now, the other place people like to smoke from this side, Delta, is they also like to smoke here a little bit sometimes. And as we just outlined previously, this can be a double-edged smoke. Because if the smoke is even farther up like this right here, for example, and our tanks are a little bit farther behind, so we'll move them back. So like here, this is a hard line of sight block, and we won't be able to see them crossing at all. And just kind of fast moving here so you can see the progression. There's a lot of line of sight blocking going on. You have to go very, very far to the right to actually see what's up. And people will do this because they want to maybe move their tank farther to the right, which is a valid thing, or they want to push infantry this way into this little hedgerow right here and not get hit from Triangle Forest. You always have to be very careful of that, because your opponent may recognize the opportunity and the timing and might be able to rotate a unit into the Triangle Forest itself from the hedgerow. So when you smoke here, in this spot specifically, from the Delta spawn, you have to be very aware of the exact timing and where your opponent's tanks are. And that's a little bit of a hint towards global strategy. So, in essence, that's the basics of the Triangle Forest fight for how it works in terms of smoking. And with that in mind, if I had a student, I'd ask, do you have any questions? And we talk about that, and I'm sure there will be questions. But with that in mind, let's now move on to Square Forest. Yeah. So, from the perspective of local strategy, Square Forest really isn't all that interesting from both sides. And that's just because you don't have any of the super interesting little line of sight tricks you can pull with Triangle Forest that you can with Square Forest. From, again, both sides. Square Forest is more interesting from the perspective of global strategy, and we'll talk more about it when we actually get there, but still, it makes sense to talk about Square Forest and what it actually does. So the Square Forest itself, from the Echo side, which is how we'll start, we can put 80 gems roughly where the AMX 10 is, or a little bit farther up. That's going to allow us to hit this road right here, and maybe even a little bit farther. Obviously, we can't hit this far, because AT gems having 2900 range doesn't really happen. But it is, but we can in essence deny this area with AT gems, from this side at least. It also gives us some line of sight across this nice open field right here, which is always good. As far as the playing of line of sight goes, again, jumping a little bit ahead to global strategy because it is kind of hard to separate the two. You can do some interesting things by, for example, where this AMX 10 is positioned right now. The positioning of this AMX 10 is such that our opponent, if they have AT gems in here, they're going to have a hard time, depending on how you position, at shooting at us. But we can hit this road, and we can hit into L Forest, like that. And we have a spot here. And in essence, what you want to do to find these types of spots, because there are many of them in Square Forest, is you pick which area you want to be exposed to and which area you don't want to be exposed to. And you go a little bit farther, and you go a little bit back into the forest. If you can see, if I go out a little bit right here, I'm now exposed to everything. Every single spot that I can shoot an AT gem at me can. But if I reverse a tad bit, now, with my partial line of sight, a little bit farther up, like that, I can't get shot at from here, clearly, but I can still shoot this road, and this road as well. If we want to be exposed to this area, but not this area, which is also comes up as far as global strategies go, we in essence are going to be doing the same thing. We'll go a little bit right here, and we're going to use this corner of the square to protect us. So right now we can see that we're still exposed to this area, but we hit this area. And if we just reverse a little bit, now we have our nice line of sight blocker, and in essence, full line of sight here. That's good, or close enough to full line of sight rather. And you can play with this as you want. So that's really the two interesting things about Square Forest from this side, from the perspective of a local strategy. With global strategy, it's a bit more different. Now, locally, the Square Forest from this side is more or less the same type of stuff. We can put tanks here, like an AMX 10 right here. And it's going to allow us to get line of sight here and here. And it's not very interesting line of sight. If you want to be cheeky, though, what you can do is you can say, I only want to shoot at this road and nothing else. So, if we reverse just a bit, just waiting for the line of sight to fall off, now you see we, in essence, only have line of sight on this part of the road right here, but AT gems can't shoot at us. And that's just a very typical common line of sight trick that you'll see better players do. Going farther back into the forest just to have line of sight on a particular area. And this area is also more or less the same story. Like, we can take advantage of the fact that there's a sort of V right here. It's a little bit hard to see, so I'll draw it out. Kind of go like that, and here. So we have this V. And if we place a unit in this sort of general area, we can in essence do the same thing. And that's going to allow us to use these two black curves to hide our unit. So let's actually show you what this looks like. we take our AMX, we put it right here to start. Like that. You can see that you're going to have line of sight on this part of the road right here. You'll have partial line of sight here, which will allow you to shoot at units moving in. And you'll have full line of sight here, which is cool. And you'll also be invulnerable to the ATGMs here. If we reverse a tad bit, here for example, it's the same story but more pronounced, as you can see. We still, though, can be shot at by ATGMs from those buildings. And reversing a little bit more, you can see that's going to become harder and harder and harder for the ATGM to shoot at us. And then finally, good, I did it correctly. Now we can only shoot at units in this very narrow path coming towards us, but the fire sport can't shoot at us itself. So that's a little trick we can do. In this area specifically, it's going to be a bit harder. It's going to be a little bit less practical because it's how narrow your line of sight actually is. So you have to go a little bit more forward, and that may mean you're a little bit more exposed just in general. But yeah, in essence, that's the local strategy of Square Forest. It's not particularly exciting, but Square Forest will become a lot more exciting once we actually talk about global phenomena. Now, the next topic on our list is L Forest. L Forest is this area right here because, well, it looks like an L. Now, from the Echo side, L Forest, from a local perspective, is pretty interesting because as we move up further and further into L Forest, into what will eventually be Gulf Town, we are going to get better and better line of sight. So let me, I guess, get some recon infantry really quickly, because that could be a good thing to show you. Speed this up. So while we wait for that to arrive, we're going to get better and better line of sight, and we might even be able to spot, actually, into the Gulf Town themselves. We may even be able to spawn to here. Regardless, though, having L Forest control with AMX 10s and with recon infantry, again, I'm just using AMX 10 as a substitute for any sort of tank or some fire sport in general. That's going to allow us to control this road right here and this road as well if we have a tank. And that's really important because it's going to get side shots and it's make it very hard for our opponent to actually use these two roads, which are the most important roads in essence, into this sort of Gulf side of the map. So if we move our recon up a little bit, as you can see here, we get pretty close, actually, to these towns. And we can see just a tad bit above the plateau, which could be useful. And same here. We might be able to just touch the forest of Hotel right here. Additionally, having some sort of recon infantry or tanks or high AT infantry right here is going to help control this area as well, which is a pretty common spot to use. So that's L Forest from local strategic perspective from Echo side. From Delta side, the whole point of L Forest, in essence, I mean, is completely global. There's nothing all that interesting from the local perspective about L Forest. Like, yes, we can put AT gems into L Forest, and we can put, like, BMP3s or some sort of AMX 10 type of unit into L Forest to control these open areas, and we can do that. But the most common use case of L Forest is, in essence, as a place to store AA for once we control more of the map. And that's a global phenomenon which we're not too interested in right now. But also to get recon infantry to spot into Square Forest. Because if you notice, if we put infantry right here in L Forest, we can spot pretty deep, as you can see. And that's going to deny our opponent all these nice little line of sight spots that we talked about. Now, a thing to keep in mind is that if we go all the way forward, right here, we're not going to have line of sight into this side of the square force. We're just going to full line of sight into here and into here. So we have to keep in mind what we want our recon to be doing. Do we want our recon right here in this functioning position to function relative to this side? Do we want it to be function a bit better for all sides, so we'd be a little farther back? Or the most extreme case, putting it like all the way right here, is going to allow us to function in square forest. As you can see. And into Dick Forest as well. So this is a very global thing to talk about. From the perspective of local strategy, there's not really all that many interesting things that actually happen in Elf Forest. Now, the last spot we're going to talk about on the Gulf side of the map, if you will, is Gulf Town. Gulf Town is incredibly important if you can take it from the Echo side. Because what Gulf Town is going to do is it's going to fully cement control of the Gulf zone. If we have Gulf Town but we lose Elf Forest from this side, we can get Elf Forest back without that much effort. If we have Elf Forest but not Gulf Town, you have to do a little bit of work. It's not that much, but it's still some work we have to be doing. So you can, as you can see here, if the legions are ATGMs, we hit everything here. We hit this road right here. We can hit even actually relatively far up this road as well, as you can see. The line of sight ends at this 1891 mark, or a little bit farther actually. And even we can hit out here as well. So the Gulf towns are pretty important from that perspective. If we move to this Gulf town right here, and like if we have recon here, for example, you can see that we actually see surprisingly deep into this forest right here. So that's a good thing. So from local strategy, controlling Gulf towns is the terminal strategy, the terminal object, if you will, taking a word from category theory. In any sort of strategic mission, if you will, on the Gulf side that doesn't involve this area. As we'll discuss later, pushing hotel itself is very hard, so we usually stop here from our strategic perspective, locally that is. Because ATGMs here, very strong. Now, flipping the script to the Delta spawn, Gulf Town is going to be important because it will control this open area right here, because we can put ATGMs and recon in there. This area right here, this open area right here. Like a mistake I personally make a lot is I always forget about how far of a reach the ATGMs actually have. And when I try to rotate units from the Dick Forest into Square Forest, and I typically get myself sideshot because I don't realize, hey, right here in this area is 2,400 meters. So this is has very much a local strategy of denying the opponent places. If you have like units like Gornoshoki 90, for example, these could also be good here, because if you notice, the Gorno 90, or like the Schützen, or like Rifle 90, if you will, we'll be able to get a nice amount of range into Square Force itself. Additionally, you also deny this area as well, and if you recon, you might be able to spot into here or here. And that's going to help you determine what your opponent is doing as well. Globally, again, just hinting at this, Gulf Town is important for actually maintaining some semblance of control and ability to do strategic things on the Gulf side of the map. So, that's Gulf Town. ATGM's recon, not much else to it. And now we get to shift over to the other side of the map, which is going to be this sort of Bravo Alpha Charlie area, with starting in essence with Dick Forest. Dick Forest, well, we're going to start with from the perspective of Echo side right here, is interesting. So, I will need more units to demonstrate this. So let me get some. We will need some arty. We'll need some actual infantry. And some infantry like that. And I think that will be okay. Perfect. Okay. So Dick Forest is interesting. From the perspective of local strategy, the idea of Dick Forest is we want to take it so that we can, in essence, CV alpha. Or at least deny a CV into alpha. At the very bare minimum, though, we're just applying some sort of pressure. Maybe it's spawn pressure, maybe it's just pressure on alpha, whatever it is. Now, a very common mistake that people make, especially newer players, or players newer to playing well, is this area right here. If you notice, this says dense forest, this says dense forest, this says nothing. So, if you attack move with your infantry up Dick Forest right here, and the opponent has infantry right here, and you get stuck in this spot, they will be taking their normal forest damage reduction, and you will be taking none. So, unless if you have like Fallschirmjäger against like reservists or line infantry, you're just going to be in for a bad time, because you'll be caught in the open, and they won't. So, from a micro perspective, a very common trick when actually attacking up Dick Forest like this is to, rather than attack move up here at the start, you click move, and then you either hit stop or attack move once you've actually reached into the forest itself. And that's going to help you actually take the town and not lose all your infantry. So that's a good thing. So that's a little spot to keep in mind right there. Another part of Dick Forest is this kind of sort of side hedgerow like this. This is less about doing some sort of offensive type of maneuver, and it's more about doing defensive things. Like this AMX right here, for example. This is one of my favorite spots in the game because of the positioning with relative to this gap right here. If you get it absolutely right. And also our side shots right here. So let's start off with this spot right here, which is good, but it's not quite as good. This spot is nice because if the opponent tries to move units down this road right here, or he has a couple units in this area above on top of the plateau, we can shoot at it. And that's nice. It gives us nice fire support. It's just a good spot. But we can go one better by... Come on. Lock on, please. There we go. Let's try this one. By taking this spot instead. Now our AMX 10 is even harder to hit, and we're going to even get more side shots from our opponent. And if our opponent also tries to walk out infantry, we can shoot just actually above onto the plateau, which is kind of nice. And again, an unexpected consequence. But also, if you notice, if we go a little bit more to the right, that should do the trick. There you go. If you notice, just sneaking in through here, we get a little bit of extra line of sight on this area right here. And we can shoot into this part of the forest too, which we couldn't do beforehand. And that's going to be important because maybe we can get that extra little 3HE shot off while they're in the open and maybe bunch together and do a lot of damage. Let's just see what happens if we go even farther over. Let's go forward, go back. It's a little bit hard to do considering the game doesn't lock on to places as nice as it should sometimes. And if we're right here, we can shoot surprisingly far. Like for whatever reason, we can also just shoot this spot. And you may rightfully say, okay, being able to shoot into this little corner, that's not that much because no one is really going to use it. But here, that's pretty deep. And that might be the difference between winning in an infantry fight versus losing that one little shot. So if I'm playing Moto, for example, putting like double AMX 10P Milans right here to defend can be very helpful because the range is such that I can use my autocannons from this distance very clearly to hit infantry, and the AT-10s will fire at the same time. So like a Snezka right here, very useful. AMX 10, very useful. M84AN's a bit of a waste, honestly, but the Izvidach, good stuff. So that's like this little spot right here specifically. Another thing you can also do is there's some surprising line of sight onto this part of the top plateau as well, which can be useful, less so from the Echo side and more so from Delta side. So if we go back a little bit with this AMX-10, stuck in the mud. Of course it gets crit, because why wouldn't it get a crit? Okay. So if we go farther back to starting from right here, we actually have a surprising amount of line of sight into this spot right here. And that's because there are these little tiny dips in the terrain that allow us to kind of just shoot just up above enough. You can see that when we're not in a dip, the line of sight starts to fall off a little bit. Now if we go forward a tad to here, we still have some nice line of sight. We go a little bit to the right. Less line of sight. But let's see what happens if we go just a bit farther up. Bam. So you can play some neat little angles right here to maybe catch some units rotating, some infantry walking, stuff like that. But from this side, it's not really that useful. The use case more comes from this side right here. Now, in terms of also just local strategy right here, we've talked a lot about the actual Dick Forest itself. We can also talk about defending against someone pushing from Dick Forest. And again, we're going to use the same principles that we used right here in this area. So at the moment, our AMX 10 has full line of sight, and that's fine if we want to shoot like transports and units in here. But if we go back a little bit, let me turn this to normal speed so it's easier to do. You can see we can really play with this line of sight. So going forward a little bit to here, we've now reached a position where fire support has to come out of the forest to shoot at us. But we can shoot at any infantry walking forward. And we're invulnerable to anything crossing here. Anything like big tanks or whatever in here. From the local strategy side as well, because we are talking about this, it is very helpful to not lose this town. Because if you lose this town, it's a lot harder to use these nice little funny line of sight spots. And it's also just a lot harder to actually get back in. If we have this town, though, we can put like Norlandsjäger, ATGMs, all the types of good stuff right here, or especially Recon as well. Recon is very strong in this town because it's going to force our opponent back. As you can see, he's taking one of the Rimas only. And this one's aside. If we have Recon here, we can see really far. Like, we can, in essence, see this VAB. We can see into here as well. And we can see all along this forest. And pretty deep into here. So Recon in this spot is also very strong. So, from the perspective of local strategy for actually getting back into thick forest, having this town is very important. It makes it a lot easier. You can do it without having the town, but it certainly helps. If you want to get back into Dick Forest and you don't have the and you don't want to use a town, or you want to mainly use this sort of the ball right here, what you're in essence going to be doing is you want to be isolating this locality right here and just focusing on this one. And the perfect tool for isolation is smoke, because smoke in essence allows us to build our own terrain, and that's what's so nice about it. So we could like put some smoke right here, something like that. And there's infantry with our AMX 10. That's going to allow us about now to just move through like that. So that's a good thing. So that's how we in essence get back into Dick Forest, and what we've done a lot of so far is talk about like little micro spots to execute maybe some local strategy that seems convenient to you, but we haven't actually talked about how to move up and down Dick Forest, and that's deceptively hard. So moving up Dick Forest through the shaft is deceptively hard because of the elevation change. The elevation change makes Dick Forest unlike any other forest fight in the game, in essence. At least to my immediate knowledge, I can think of off the top of my head. And the reason why is that the basic recipe, as you should know from before watching this video, of a forest fight, in essence, is being able to leverage our fire support in effective ways to kill the other guy's infantry. If, like, think about, for example, that's like typical US gameplay. You spam riflemen, then the boxes come, and then the triple stack of M1 Abrams come. It's all about using fire support. The reason why that's a little bit hard is because this elevation right here means if we try to click move a VAB up like that, we can't just move up. We have to take this path right here. So in essence, if we try to push up Dick Forest right now, without actually, without really prepping it, then our fire support has to come all the way around the side and is probably going to die, and our infantry also is probably going to get hurt as well. So, to push up Dick Forest, you must have high-quality infantry to do it well, at least. You can absolutely push up with a bunch of Rovite blobs and Rifleman blobs and whatever, but the double stack of Rima, the double stack of Fallschirmjäger, the double stack of Panzer Yakari, or whatever, is going to be able to do a much better job. And that's because when we don't have, when we don't have when we don't have access to fire support immediately, then the quality of our infantry, or more accurately, the relative quality of our infantry, matters a lot more. So that's our first consideration here. And with that in mind, it's pretty immediately obvious that pushing up Dick Forest is going to be a lot more complicated than just any other forest fight. Because we can't just shove infantry, then fire support, and call it a day. What we have to do is we have to make use of all the methods to actually attack the localities surrounding the shaft of Dick Forest. And to do that, we have 4 roads, or rather 4 avenues that we can go through. We have this road right here, the shaft of Dick Forest itself, the road right here, and then one that people forget often, quite often, is this little side area. So these are our four methods to get up to the Dick Forest locality, and let's talk about them. First one to talk about is number 1, which is this road right here. Right away, you can see that using this road as any sort of primary offensive route is going to be a bit tricky. And that's because if our opponent has fire support like here in these areas, we are immediately showing side to our opponent if we move up right here. And that's just because of the way that the road faces. It faces away from Dick Forest itself, so it's going to be a bit harder to use. So, in terms of trying to find a sort of sequence, if you will, to actually attack Dick Forest, this one can't come first. Next spot is number 2, right here. Now, we already talked about this, in essence of we just send infantry up through here. But if we only think about sending infantry up through here and we don't use any of the other avenues, we're going to have a problem because we can't actually hold this area. Because if we have this area right here, our infantry to get to here now has to come through the forest like that, which is going to take time, and we're going to have a lack of fire support. Meanwhile, oops, there we go, our opponent can bring in infantry like this, so they'll have the infantry and the fire support, and they can come in like this as well, and like this potentially, or even here. So if we only use number 2, we're going to have a problem, because we just have no ability to actually hold this area. Now number 3 is this road right here. This road is directed directly at this town block right here, and it's also going to allow us to bring out our fire support. Once again, if we only try to use number 3, we're going to be in for a bad time, because maybe there's a helo right here, and if you saw that video of Nick playing Raz pre-patch with a KT killing everything, that can happen to you. We can have infantry right here hitting that, and we have the guys in the town. So we can't only use number 3. And lastly, with number 4 is oops, we don't want red, we want blue. Is this road right here. And the idea of this road is to lead up into this town right here. Now, if we only use this road right here once again, we're going to be in for a bad time, because our opponent can completely focus on shutting down this road. They can have all their fire support directed right here, and we're not actually going to be able to take anything. It's not going to give us really as much control of Dick Forest itself as we want. So what we have to do is we have to develop a forest composition that's going to make use of multiple lanes here. And we have to distribute our forest composition, keeping in mind the amount of points that we have in total, given like a build up, what our opponent's doing, what we're doing, a whole bunch of different factors, to make use of multiple of these lanes. So we have to distribute our forces across at least 2, if not more, of these lanes if we want to have any sort of hope of doing anything in the long term. And I know I'm kind of talking a little about globality here, or global phenomena, but Alpha and Bravo are connected, like basically touching. So it's kind of hard to avoid the concept of global phenomena. So to actually push up Dick Forest, we know that number 2 right here is a must. We must include this. Otherwise, any other sort of lanes that we're going to be using is going to be very, very much a dice roll. So we must include number 2. I'm just going to actually label them in black right here. Oh, that's not black. That's black. There we go. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. There we go. Okay, so we must use number 2. And then we get to pick and choose from 1, 3, and 4. Now, in the most ideal scenario, from the theory standpoint, we will use 1, 2, 3, and 4. Less so 1, with less emphasis on that, but 2, 3, and 4 definitely. So the idea of 2 is we push up right here to deal with our have our quality infantry deal with the opponent. And what that's going to do is any sort of fire support the opponent had right here or in this area, we can put some X's through that. They might as well no longer exist. Because either they'll be dead, or they'll probably be rotating into the units that you're pushing up here. Because if they stay there, they may just lose infantry. If you are pushing up some great quality infantry. So like if you have a Fallschirmjäger or a Corps Mariner, for example, or a lot of Stute Troop in, and they don't bring the fire support, Mo shoots in as well for just quality HE efficient infantry, they're going to lose a lot of points. So they have to do something about this. Now, with that out of the way, all of a sudden, number 3, as you can see right here, becomes a lot more viable to use because we don't have to worry about this side as much. We now only have to worry about this town right here. And the same story holds for number 4. So in essence, the ideal combination is going to be one that uses 2, 3, 4, and the number 1 can come out a little bit later to help offer some fire support to units in this general area and this area right here. So let's actually sequence a local strategy. So let's relabel 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, this is the ideal case of we have time to build up, we have MLRS, we have everything. So step number, and I'm going to label our steps with the yellow pen right here. So step number 0, if we have it, is to send some sort of MLRS to like this area, or these areas. These are the areas we want to target with MLRS. The spot number 1 we want to target with MLRS is important because when we push our quality infantry up, it is going to give us a big advantage because we'll be calm ideally, assuming we're not getting or we're not getting like he's not using some Oregon to counter RDS or not counter RD, counter using a defensive Oregon. That's the word I'm looking for. And it's going to make us win these fights a lot faster, and we're going to take less damage. Number 2 is if we think our opponent is smarter, or trying to, in essence, play mind games with us, and thinking, okay, I know he has an MLRS like an LRM, Oregon, or Plowman, so I want to make sure that my units are going to be farther back to avoid spot number 1, which is a more obvious spot. And that way, after I see the RD in number 1 miss, I can push my units from number 2 in. So the idea of hitting number 2 is that we know our opponent is playing like this, and we can have some sort of indications that this is happening, this is how it's going. Then we hit number 2 first, and then we push our units up so that he stays panicked. And number 3 is so that by hitting number 3, all the units in here are panicked. And that's going to allow us to use lane number 3 easier. So step 0 is going to be hitting one of these spots right. At least 2 of these spots right here. We don't want to full salve because full salving the Oregon is a noob move, and hopefully we're not noobs. So we want to hit 2 of them. If we have 2 RD pieces, hitting all 3 is great if you can, but if not, it's not the end of the world. In my games personally, I always do number 1 or 2, and my second spot I'll hit number 3 sometimes, but most of the time it's number 1 and number 2. Because I'm not that concerned about number 3 if I'm using lane 4. So with that in mind, the first step in our plan, which now can be labeling as yellow, so let me erase the numbers here so it's not confusing, is to use lane number 2. And we push up like that. Because any fire support that was in that blob, in that circle that we're pushing into, will be disappeared. It will be vanished. And it's going to make way for us to use lanes 3 and number 4. Now, once this is happening right here, we can do a lot of damage. And then at some point, we can use lanes number 3 and number 4 at the same time. And what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to gain control of this yellow circle up here. So in terms of sequence, I'm going to call, I'm going to order it like this. And 3 and 4 can in essence go at the same time. But 3 kind of has to go just a bit first. And the reason why is any sort of ATGMs or high quality infantry in that town block right there needs to be distracted by number 3 so our high quality infantry number 4 can walk in and do the job. And that could be like a single squad of Spets Gru, some Jedi, it could be Commando Para, it could be Base Legion, Yakjande, how you're supposed to actually pronounce it, whatever. Some sort of high quality infantry has to go through number 4. So through number 3, we're going to send up a bunch of like shitty stuff first, just to see if there's any fire support and to absorb the damage. And then we send our actual like tanks and shitty infantry up to really get our fire support coming up here. So that's the idea on how we leverage this in our sequence. And then lastly for number 1, this is going to be something like, this will be 3/4 because we can have units come up through number 1 at the same time, and maybe we can have some nice little line of sights into this area, which conveniently is where that second blob is, that second yellow blob is. But typically we don't use lane number 1 as much from this side. So that's in essence the idea of how this sort of sequence of attacking attacking up Dick Forest works. Now, this is ideal. In your games, you may not get the opportunity to use all 3 spots. You should try if you do, because your attack will be a lot more effective. But if you can't, it's not the end of the world. In that case, you're in essence choosing 2 and probably 3, but you could choose 2 and 4. The reason why 3 and 4, though, are so important and why we must do them is because if we control this yellow area right here, now we can use lane number 3 to actually send up our own fire support. And if we send up our own fire support, then we have some sort of ability to hold the upper plateau of Dick Forest. So that is Dick Forest from the Echo side. And now, let's clear the screen, rotate the camera, and talk about Dick Forest from the Delta side. There we go. So we're going to in essence do the same sort of exercise. We have this lane right here is number 1. This right here is number 2. Number 3. And number 4. It's a crooked arrow. And as is the case, or as was the case from the Echo spawn, we can't only use one of these because we'll have no ability to hold. If we only try to use number 1, then it's not that hard to counter because we're stuck in the open with our tanks or infantry or whatever. So we're going to take a lot of damage, and we might be able to get counterattacked potentially. So that's not going to work. If we only try to use number 2, if you recall, we have this nice little spot right here. Right here. We have down from this town block right here, and then in the forest themselves. So only using number 2, as you can see by all the blue arrows drawn, will clearly end in disaster. If we only try to use number 3, we're going to have, once again, just tracing these arrows, a similar result. Here, 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 here. It's just going to be very hard for us to actually do stuff, and we'll get contained. And for number 4, we're going to pretend right now that Square Force is not in play. So let's just cross that out, because we're thinking right now locally and not globally. We may have this ATGM from here, potentially. Or if not from there, just be more local from here. Here can happen. And then we also have all the guys in here. So once again, if we try to use only one of these methods of going down Dick Forest, so going down the plateau, it will end in disaster if we actually want to hold anything. So let's talk about what we should do for actually making this work. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So like before, where we were moving up the plateau, we still have this little area right here without forest to consider, and we're still going to be without fire support. So the same sort of principles of high quality infantry going down number 3 still apply. If we because it's of just how hard it will be to actually leverage fire support to do things. So yeah. So we have to have high quality infantry down here. Now for number 1, going like that. Actually, nope. Let me go. You know, I will go number 1 right now. And for number 1 going like that, it's going to be the same sort of force composition going the other way. We're going to want things like some autocannons, maybe some infantry, but we're going to be going a little bit heavier on the heavier on the vehicle side. So our force composition has to include autocannons, and the distribution of it has to be heavier into 1 as opposed to vehicles. So that's what number 1 is going to be doing. Number 2 is where kind of like shitty infantry is going to be going, and then our transports, and then our actual high quality stuff. But of course, we have to watch out for these angles right here. And the whole purpose of number 1 is, in essence, to remove the spot where the AMX 10 is, like these locations. That's the idea. And then maybe we can go all the way. But most likely not. So that's the whole point of number 1 and number 2 and number 3. And lastly, with number 4 is in essence to attack the left ball, or the right ball from this perspective. Sorry. Because if we can control this area right here, that's just one less spot number 3 has to worry about, and we can have more positions of leverage fire support. So, as was before, let's sequence some sort of way of thinking about this. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So, step 0 in our plan should be using MLRS if we have it. So, the 2 obvious spots are here and here. For the Oregon, for the LRM, for all those types of MLRS, these 2 positions are the best for us to use already, because they happen to be like actually the perfect size for the dispersion on the MLRS. And doing that is going to really stun all the guys there, and it's going to make using number 2 and number 3 a lot easier. Specifically with number 3, our infantry will be less likely to actually get hit by and damaged, which is important. So that's for step 0. Then step 1 is we send down our infantry from number 3. And that's because we really want to clear out these sort of dangerous locations right here. And if we have time here, but most likely not this location, because to deal with to make number 2 easier. So then when we're doing this, we can go number 2 down as well after we go down number 3. Now at this point we'll find out whether or not our opponent actually is using these spots. Oops, we want red, not blue. And we can use our tanks to take tank fights here and stuff like that. And then at about this time, we can send number 1 down, because our opponent will be showing rear armor here. And like the previous side, number 4 can also happen at this point, sort of simultaneously, in essence with 2 as well. So number 4 can happen either simultaneously with 2, 3, or 4. So number 4 is very flexible in how we execute, because maybe it really depends on how much stuff our opponent has. Maybe our opponent has a whole lot of stuff in this yellow blob, and number 4 is a lot more necessary, and it has to be done sooner. Maybe they don't have as much. It just depends. Um, but yeah, that's how this sequence works in an ideal setting. Now, in a non-ideal setting, which will be the vast majority of your games, um, you're not going to have the luxury of doing all four of these most likely. You're going to have to pick and choose. So number three you have to do number three, and I would probably go with 2 and 3, me personally. Um, and then I can start adding a number 1 and number 4 as I see fit. But yeah, that's how pushing down Dick Forest works. Um, Now in Dick Forest itself from this side, this area right here is not that exciting. It's just a straight forest fight. Like, you have some little open spots right here, which we can talk about in a second, which is more of an alpha type of thing. But this area is not that exciting. Here, though, is where some interesting stuff happens. And to show you, let's take this AMX-10 and put it here. Oh, and we will also need to use this spot right here, so I'll get this AMX-10 here in preparation for that. Now, this spot right here is actually a really nice spot, because the forest is going to protect us from any sort of like tanks in here. But if you check it out, bam, you get line of sight into this little area right here. And if we go a bit deeper to the forest slightly, you can see that, and we go a little bit farther ahead, you're going to get enough line of sight, as you can see, to shoot at infantry walking forward. But Fire Sport here can't shoot at you, and Fire Sport here obviously can't shoot at you. So playing around, in essence, with line of sight in this little area right here is very strong. Now, for this side right here, this spot becomes a lot more useful, because we can shoot down, and we can shoot the Fire Sport that will be living here, or infantry that's walking forward. And that's going to be a lot more useful from this side. And it's going to be pretty easy to break line of sight very quickly, as you can see here. So this spot can be pretty useful for like soaring tanks to get a couple hits off on infantry that's walking in, and it can be the difference between deciding whether or not you win an infantry fight or you lose an infantry fight. So yeah, that's important. I will be right back because my voice hurts and I need water. So you'll see the great cut in the video. Okay, I am back. And hopefully my throat should hold out for a little bit more. My voice hurt. So yeah, this spot's really good, and you can play with the line of sight by going a little bit in and out of the forest. And it's a very strong spot that your opponent has to deal with. So I think that kind of wraps up actually Dick Forest. We talked about this area right here, this line of sight here. Here is just a normal forest fight. Oh, this area. We're going to talk about the flanks a little bit. If you control like this spot in Dick Forest right here, and we have an AMX-10 here, you can actually see quite unexpectedly far, at least unexpected for me, into this area right here. And that's pretty cool, I think, at least. So that's a spot we can go for. And from this side as well, we can also take these sort of little narrow angles. And this little tree line right here. And go like that. At least in my experience, these angles right here are less useful because they're a lot easier to position out of, as you can see. And yeah, for getting full control of Dick Forest, it always helps if we can get infantry in this town, like Recon, ATGMs, Norland's Jaeger, Leka Pagoda, Bertzkapez, stuff like that. Because it's kind of hard to tell right here without like something to click on, but you actually can see down this road pretty far and do some nice damage and zoning. So Now that we've talked about Dick Forest, we have two more localities to talk about before we get to global strategies, which was, in my opinion, the fun part about all this. And that's going to be actually Alpha and Charlie. And I guess I should talk about why pushing Hotel is kind of hard, and why pushing Fox is kind of hard as well. But that shouldn't take too long. So, Alpha. In Alpha, there are a couple main features. There is this town block right here, this town block, this part of the forest, and this area right here. In most cases, it is kind of rare that you'll be able to get all the way over to here. Just because they're so close to enemy spawn, it's just hard to do. Usually, from the Echo side, at least considering Alpha, you can get this and this. And if you can get this, that's great, because that's going to give you a lot of potential for zoning. So, I guess I should move some infantry over here, and some AMX 10s as well. Okay. So, if we can get an ATGM, which might make sense to buy, I suppose. Maybe two. Okay. So while the ATGM's arriving, the obvious spots for an ATGM is like this town block these town blocks right here. Ideally, one of these two. And that's just because you'll get a line of sight, as you can see. Just a second. Into this area as well. And contain your opponent here. So, as you can see, you have a decent amount of line of sight. Like, it obviously gets broken after a certain point. But it's still pretty good. Like, 2,000 meters is not bad, honestly, considering how wonky the line of sight can sometimes be. And then here, you know, you have a lot of range. This is just all the way open. In this town right here specifically, it's also the same story. You know, you get lots of range to zone out, and to contain your opponent to just this area. And this is just uninterrupted line of sight. It's great. Now you also have this area. And here, you can actually do some tricky things with the line of sight, which doesn't look like it, honestly, but there are two tricky things we can do. The first tricky thing has to do with the fact that there's a slight separation in the forest right here, which I will highlight in black. So that's where the first separation, the interesting little line of sight trick that we can do comes from. The next one comes from the fact that we have this sort of crescent shape right here. And I will first talk about the gap in the forest, actually. That sounds like a good idea. So, taking an AMX 10 and just putting it here. One of the things that we can see from this gap is, come on, go back, forward, there we go. Is that if you're not expecting it, you get a lot of line of sight. More so than was normal, obviously. And that can be nice because if there's infantry in here that you can see, you can get an extra little shot off from far away and keep your fire support safe. Now, you can also move up a bit to here and check this out. Any infantry that wants to advance, you can hit them. And if we go a little bit to the left, now we can't be seen by anything, but we can see pretty far into this forest right here. So you can do some neat little things with like autocannons and AMX 10s, like from this spot right here, like a double KTs, for example, or BMP2s, stuff like that, can be very strong here. if you just play with line of sight. So that's that spot. Now, and just kind of how do you do that in principle? And you have to obviously in-game practice these types of things. They just won't come to you automatically. Now, the next little bit of interesting part has to do with the fact that we have this curve right here. And I will draw it out in black just so we can reference what's actually happening. Okay. Ooh, I can't zoom. I forgot that this is a thing. Close enough. There you go. So, fuck. We're not drawing today. So if you notice, if we have our tanks right here, we can shoot here, but any units right here or right here can't shoot at us. So if our opponent is trying to push down through this road like that, then we can shoot it. If we have good positioning, we can shoot at them, and they can't shoot at us. Now, if they have their tanks right here, for example, they're storing them right here, then we have a bit of a problem, because they can advance on us, and nope, we're going to lose our stuff to side shots. Unfortunately for our opponent, though, unfortunately for us, we have the ability to micro things, and we have some local strategic know-how. And if we reverse a tad bit, even just this tiny much right here, all of a sudden, we are completely invulnerable to everything on this side. And we can shoot this stuff, and we can shoot right here. I recently did this in an example in my Game Against Ghosty on Paddy, if you want to check that out, for this practically. That's just the last time I can remember doing this explicitly. So that's a little thing we can do here. Now, if we try to go from this perspective, right here, let's go fast, then we don't really have the little like the same little line of sight stuff here can sort of work, depending on where we are, like relative to the edge right here. Like if we're a little bit farther over, for example, he can't shoot at us. We can shoot at him though. So we can advance in and out right here, and so long as we stay in the forest, we should just be invisible to the ATGMs here, and still should be able to shoot at everything. And even if the ATGMs do shoot, as long as we're migrating, reverse, we're good to go. It doesn't take much to break line of sight here. So because we have that little curve, we can do some nice little line of sight tricks like that. Now, for actually doing some sort of offense into alpha, we have to keep in mind that our opponents are probably going to be storing tanks in this general area right here or right here. So we want to try to walk across the towns. So if we want to try to walk from here to where the miscellaneous or where the Vabs are, it can be a little bit challenging. Oh my god, getting the pathing. Holy shit. And it can be a bit challenging because we may get hit by fire sport. We don't know. So it always helps to have some sort of functioning recon in the area to help deal with this problem. So if we can get our... Did I buy recon? I did not buy recon. If we can get our recon where the AMX-10 is, for example, we can see pretty deep into here and maybe hit this area as well. If we're a little farther back, we'll get some better line of sight once we correct for it in a second. We should get some better line of sight, as you can see, into this area where his fire sport will be. So, yeah, that's going to be pretty useful. Being able to know where his units are to see, hey, can I push across this open area, or do I have to wait and buy tanks and stuff like that? Now, recon here will also reveal the positions. If you advance forward, like we're going to the extreme amount right now. We'll also reveal the positions of units in here and right here as well. And that's important to know because it knows, okay, it tells us, okay, do I have to be cautious with pushing, or can I push a little bit more aggressively and a little bit more recklessly depending on your definitions of things. So, yeah, that's something for us to consider as well. And if you can control alpha right here, that's perfect because we get a nice CV location, and at that point we've probably won the game, maybe. Um, but if not, we have a lot of map control and a lot of ability to actually apply pressure elsewhere. Now, for just I'm going to include this area. This is technically a separate locality, but I'm going to include it anyway because, like, if you can get like 80 gems and recon units into these little patches of forest right here, for example, it's nice because it makes it harder for your opponent to actually use this open space, and that's always a good thing for us. Um, but again, this is so close to the enemy spawn; it's hard to do, hard to actually put things there. Now, as far as local strategy goes, the biggest thing you have to keep in mind is that you are very, very close to the enemy spawn point. The enemy spawn point is here. Oops, sorry, my mouse. There we go. And they have to go like that. And they either come through here, or they can come like that. In comparison, let me actually zoom out a little more. Okay. Yeah, that should be good. So the enemy kind of goes like this. Or all the way around like that. Something of the sort. These are very rough. These are very rough lines. And you know, take in mind that the perspective is a little bit warped because we're at an angle, but we've come all the way up like that. So even taking in mind that our perspective is warped by the fact that we're not like bird's eye view, if you want to go then you can just clearly see that our supply lines are longer. So what that means is that if we want to hold alpha, it does not suffice to equally trade. Because if we are equally trading, and it is occurring all the time, our opponent will be able to get more reinforcements here faster, and then eventually we will lose alpha. So if you want to hold alpha in the long term, from a local strategic perspective, we actually have to really do a good job zoning and then trade better. Because if we trade worse, our opponent can build up and push us off the map. I've had games where I took like 440, and then like when I didn't know how to hold alpha very well, and when I didn't know how to play alpha very well, and my opponent built up and then pushed me completely back to my spawn and took 500 in the last like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of the game, with a plus a bajillion. So with that in mind, we have to be very careful on actually holding alpha for too long and investing too much into alpha, because it doesn't take much for our opponent to get us out in terms of raw points if they have perfect local strategy with perfect local strategy backed up by the micro. So a thing in the back of your mind when you're in alpha should always be: is it time to pull back to Bravo? Because your opponent has that. Because then your opponent's supply lines get longer, yours get shorter. Your opponent still has to deal with the things they left in alpha, and that's going to give you time to reinforce Bravo, or Dick Forest rather. So, yeah, that's kind of alpha and the one actual locality up above from the Echo side. From the Delta side, alpha is actually tricky. And the reason why alpha is tricky is because of these ATGM spots right here. Like, if we control alpha, for example, and we're trying to push into here, no problem. This is just straight forest fighting, nothing too interesting about it. Not worth talking about in this video, because this is not a how to forest fight video. This is a how to strategy video. So, if we're playing from alpha into here, this area, not a problem. If we're trying to get back into alpha, though, that's where things become more complicated. And the reason why is this ATGM right here could be, and this spot right here as well. What I forgot to mention from the Echo side of alpha is that if you try to push like a tank into this area right here, This can very clearly end in disaster if you try to push across without doing all that much, because
Am Ende kommt es doch drauf an,
80 gem
was
here,
richten uns ein Gewehr an.
80 gem here, infantry here, big problema, not counting whatever's
Wollen
over
wir wen
here.
mitnehmen?
So you gotta be very careful. And this 80 gem
Vorrichtinformation und
can
einsatzbereit.
basically shoot it through here as well, so you have to be careful of that as well. This was for showing side armor through here. And it's my opinion, at least, and that people may disagree with this, and that's fine, that there is no one exact right way to push into alpha because of how situationally dependent it is. Like, if your opponent, for example, has like a deck with Legion 90 in it, and they control this town, and they just have, Legion 90 like sitting right here, forget it. You're not going to be getting into this building in a long time. If we try to push from this perspective, like it's just not going to happen. If we try to push like from this perspective right here, it's still not going to happen because it's going to be very hard to actually leverage fire support. I mean, meanwhile, our opponent has stuff like that from here and from the town itself. So if we can stop our opponent from getting a lot of units like Legion 90 or whatever into that sort of back town, that will make our life a lot easier. If that does happen, then we have to suffer a little bit. Because if we can stop our opponent from getting to this spot right here, then we don't have to, we don't have to worry about these angles right here at all, which is great for us. We only have to worry about 180 gem, and worrying about 180 gem is a lot easier than worrying about 2. So, if I can get this town, great, but if I can't, I'm not going to try all that hard, honestly. Like, if I find that the double stack Legion 90, they're double Norland's Jaeger or something like that, it's just going to be a pain in the ass to get out. And it can be a massive point sink to get actually that town back. Especially if this 80 gem right here is active. So, usually what I try to do is I try to make, and this, again, I'm not saying this is the absolute right way to do it, but it's how I like to do it. And I'm not saying it's easy to do, this is hard. This is one of the areas on this map I still struggle with the most. I try to make use of these roads right here. Because the idea is that if I can push this, or even here potentially, from this side, what I'm doing is I'm saying, nice 80 gem you have here. I don't care about it. And I am just attacking this, this area. And that's a lot easier for me to do. And then from here, if I can work my way up like that, not pushing down Bravo, we don't want to do that because we can't support ourselves in the long term, then all of a sudden what's going to happen is it's going to be easier to push this way through here. And generally, this actually spot right here specifically, that's generally easier to push through, but sometimes not. Most of the time it is, though. You can also push in like that. So if we control this area right here, the map is going to be sort of redrawn like this. Our opponent has things right here, potentially, but we have this area and a little bit of this area. And this is a lot easier to deal with because we now have only 2 as opposed to many MLRS targets. 1, 2. We now only have 1 spot depending on which we choose to smoke. We can like put some smoke here. If we want, we can put smoke here. It depends on what we want to do. And we have many more angles to leverage fire support. And our opponent, meanwhile, can't come up this road as much. Because, check us out. We got stuff here, 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 and here. So it's going to be harder for our opponent to actually do things. And And most likely, your opponent can't use this road as well because they're going to be showing side to us when they get out. And they'll be exposed to our air spawn and not in a good spot where they can use AA. So that's the idea behind this. And then we can just take back these two towns. Now, for Alpha, if we are in the very fortunate situation of we control these two towns still, but our opponent controls like all of this area or whatever, then that's not that bad actually, because what we still try to do is we still try to push this way, but it's going to be a lot harder for our opponent to actually use this road to reinforce. So we'll be okay. So that's how I think about Alpha. And the last really big zone to talk about that gets play is Charlie. Sorry, big locality to talk about is Charlie. From Echo side, this is from Echo side pushing into Charlie. If you've lost it completely, is a little bit tricky because let's use black here. Because as you can see, this town block is separated from all of this stuff right here. And if we try to use this road to push directly back in or do something like that, there are so many angles we have to worry about. We have to worry about this angle, this angle, this angle, this angle, and this angle. If our opponent is playing this correctly, of course. And that's a big problema. So generally, at least for me, I don't like to use this angle this road all that much, unless if I know that I don't have to worry about, say, here, here, and here. If I don't have to worry about those, I'm a lot more open to doing this. But generally, I try to use this area right here. Because if I can get this spot right here, it was going to be avoiding a lot of the problems I had before. And I can just take a straight town fight and maybe put my fire sport like in this area or something of the sort. And again, this is local, not global, so I'm discounting Square Force right now. But I'm already hinting as to why Square Force is such an awesome thing. So then from here, I can take high quality infantry and I can hopefully clear out Charlie. If I have Charlie, actually, then it's not that hard in the slightest, in fact, just to push through to the next forest right here. This is not hard. And generally, if you're the opponent, you actually try to abandon this area after a certain point if you can't go all the way into Charlie, just because of how hard it is to hold this in the long term. Because, you know, MLRS, that's a big problem. But yeah, Charlie is not that exciting, really, from this side. It's just hard. I don't really know that many great tips and tricks other than don't get yourself locked out fully and just have good global strategy so that doesn't happen. From this side, Charlie's actually interesting because we now get to make use of this angle, this one, and all these little spots right here if we can hold it. For holding Charlie. Now, for actually in the long term, or sorry, not long term, for actually pushing into Charlie, that's a bit more complicated. Because in essence, we're going to be pushing, assuming that we have these two blue towns right here, which is really helpful if we can get it. But assuming we have these, we're in essence going to be pushing like through here. That's the idea. And our opponent has a lot of exposed buildings, which means we have a lot of angles to cover. So if we can use some sort of MLRS to hit this, that's great. And we're going to use a lot of fire support as well. But this is hard. And normally I don't like to do this unless if I can do it very quickly, which is why I can do it with moto decks as opposed to non-moto decks. If I'm doing this later in the game, I want to have a massive KD advantage. Otherwise, this can be problematic. And I can lose a lot of points doing this. And like the situation in Alpha, if I trade evenly, I'm probably losing because of how close my opponent's spawn is. Unless, of course, I have a massive KD advantage, then trading evenly is good for me, but I'm assuming everything's roughly equal when I say that. Um, there are some funny little line of sight things you can pull off here. I'll use this AMX 10, bring a couple of them over, and speed up. Okay. So if we go right here, for example, you can see that we're not going to get full line of sight here, and we will get full line of sight on these buildings right here, which can be nice. If we go a little bit farther back, we get line of sight here, a little farther back actually. There we go. And now we're going to be invisible to here, and we only hit these buildings. So you can do a couple funny things like that, and here as well. Like for here, you can shoot at the this area, like that, and you'll be exposed to here. But if I did it correctly, which I didn't, to be a little bit closer, you'll now be immune to everything else, just because of this little bit of force that juts out. So yeah, you can do a couple little things like that, but it's not that interesting. Doesn't come up all that often. So with that in mind, let's talk briefly about Hotel and Fox. And I think with that, we'll have covered all of the localities. We can start to actually talk about global phenomena, which is more fun. Hotel is hard to push. Hard to push, easy to hold because of, one, how close to the spawn it is, and two, you have this giant plateau in the way, so it's hard to actually use fire support. The same problem we had in Bravo. If we try to pop up through here, for example, we have this to worry about, here, here. And that's kind of sucky. If we try to pop up through here, oops. If we try to pop up through here, we have this to worry about. Once again, kind of sucky. So in essence, what you're reduced to doing is you're kind of just walking infantry or like units through this area right here, and you can, and along this one in yellow, you can send vehicles there, but again, it's just very hard to get that far. And you can send infantry up through there, but it's really easy to defend because there's this giant gap from forest to not forest, and it's just hard to do things because of that. So hotel's hard to push. You generally don't do it. Sending units up there is a death sentence, and you basically try to do it if you think you can get a cheeky kill and you want to keep your opponent busy. But you're most likely not going to be getting much action in hotel. Trying every now and again to push hotel can be kind of fun and can be nice. Like with push, I mean like send like minimal points up to keep your opponent busy. But it's not something you actually try to push in the long term. And I'm in essence with this explanation explain why it's so easy to defend hotel. Like, you know, ATGM here, infantry here, you're done. Not much else to it. The locality by hotel, though, that I sort of skipped over, is this one right here. And if you can get units into there from the Echo side, that's great. Most likely, though, you can't. Otherwise, if you can, you probably won the game already. So it's not worth actually talking about this, because it just doesn't come up. And same thing from Delta side. You literally just store units there. It doesn't really come up at all besides that. From Fox, this is also a position that just is pushed right here. Is just pushed less. It is more pushable, though, in my opinion, than Hotel is, because you don't have that plateau to deal with. And also you have these nice little hedgerows right here that you can get recon in. So for defending Fox, it's not that hard, you know. eight, not black, blue. ATGM here, you're done. You can put like some sort of fire sport vehicles like here, here. You don't have to be very precise, and you're done. It's very standard to defend. Not worth going over. From the other side, it's hard to push. And it can happen, but it comes as rare. Basically, what you try to do is you try to get some recon and move it up through these buildings, but so buildings, bushes right here. And the idea is maybe you can spot stuff like this, and that's cool and all. Um, and it's also just useful to have there because maybe you'll spot like a CV and Charlie or something like that. But again, less likely. And then for actually holding it, what you try to do is like ATGM here, here, and maybe a recon will spot something for the ATGMs to kill, maybe not. But if you can, you just kind of send a couple of transports down this path right here to harass your opponent, maybe into their spawn, or maybe you come around behind through there, like that. Because there's so much open ground, though, and because it's so close to the opponent's spawn, it's just hard to push. And I think with that, I have given my opinions on everything, on all the localities that actually matter. Like this part of the map right here, this doesn't come up unless you're trying to do some sort of helo cheese. This part as well, like it's just not as useful because you're not controlling anything directly. Like it can be nice to drive units around the side of it, but controlling it, meh. And for here, you just buy base defense. So I think that is everything with locality. And in a short hop, skip, and some editing magic, I'll be right back. Okay, I am back. I had to restart my computer. Um, so that's why everything is blank. But we finished talking about local strategy in all of these areas. And I believe now it is time to start talking about the global stuff. And we'll start from the Echo spawn. And from Echo, there are really three main types of openers we can do. The first one is a triangle opener. The second is or sorry, not openers. The three main strategies we can do. The triangle opener, not openers, jeez. The triangle attack, or the a square force push, and then the alpha push. So and then based off of those, we can more or less build our understanding of how to build more complicated openers, like split openers. So let's talk about the triangle stuff. So the idea of the triangle stuff is that our units come up through here. We occupy the positions that we talked about right here. And our opponent is going to have units in this general sort of area. And the idea is that we'll take our tank fight and we will kill his blob right here. Now, in doing such, it always helps to have square forest. And the reason why is, I mean, the naming here is kind of bad, but at least how I think about it, there's a theory of triangles. In essence, and this is the start of it. And it's going to come up again and again and again throughout more maps. But in essence, we have currently three zones. We have this sort of triangle forest right here, square forest right here, and then we have Gulf Town right here. And these zones act as vertices of a triangle, as you can see if we actually draw it out. And it helps to control 2 out of 3 vertices before making the attack for the third. In a way that we're going to be exposed. So let me actually clear that because that's probably a little bit confusing and abstract. So concretely speaking, and this will come up again and again and again, if we try to push through to Gulf Town and we do not have Square Forest, so Square Forest is controlled by Pink, what happens is Pink can get a bunch of side shots here and here. And additionally, pink has all of these angles too. So the result of this is that when we try to go for this vertex over here, we're going to lose all our units because we have a lack of firing angles and we have the ability to be getting side shot, which sucks. Now, if we back up to here, and all of a sudden if we instead have this area and triangle, so we have square forest and triangle forest, and now we push into here, we will no longer be getting side shot. We have this angle and this angle, while the opponent only has this angle right here, and these sort of angles right here. And if we want to, we can also hit L forest. So what this all means is that controlling 2 vertices before attacking the third one, the third vertex, makes our position a lot more stable once we hold it, and it makes the attack a lot easier. And this is kind of a no-duh thing that it may sound like I'm pontificating on. But it comes up again and again and again, and I think it's worth mentioning here because this is the most easy to spot case in my opinion. Um, so yeah, this sort of idea of triangles, of controlling 2 vertices before attacking a third, where your attack will be exposed to the vertices, that's important. Now, in the case of if we don't have square forest right here, then attacking into square forest like this, actually, let me just erase things. So, we had this as a vertex, yeah, this as a vertex, yeah, this as a vertex, this is us, and this is them. So if we try to attack across like that, this is obviously going to be a problem because we can get hit from here and from here. So that's an issue. So this is why when we want to retake square forest, if we don't have square forest, or we want to take square forest in general, and these parts of the vertices are still in play. Let me just draw the actual sides of the triangle. We don't take this blue arrow right here. Instead, what we normally do is take this arrow and we come in like that. And again, this is an obvious thing if you play this map a little bit, because you know not this attacking like this is going to get you side shot, but it comes up again and again and again, and it's just worth mentioning it here. So yeah, having square forest makes this a lot easier because now we have multiple angles into Golf Town. And that's going to really help us solidify control late game and actually make the attack easier. So in essence, this is the start of the triangle plan. The triangle game plan, if you will, is to open for triangle forest right here, control square forest, win the tank fight right here, or like push the opponent's forces back, take Golf Town, and then to keep on applying pressure, we rotate from the golf locality all the way to Dick Forest, and then we push up through here with the plan that we outlined earlier. So we have step 1, step 2, step 3. This is the most simple and straightforward way for how to play Paddy Field from this side. Really, really easy. And obviously, if you only do the same opener again and again and again, once you reach a certain skill level, people will start counter-stratting you. So it makes sense to know different openers and how to play the game dynamically. Because you're not going to win every single engagement, you're not going to do the same opener every single time. In consideration, by the way, I forgot to mention this, for the triangle forest attack, it always helps to have like recon in these sorts of areas along the flank. Because that's going to allow us to see but behind his smoke cloud potentially. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. So if our opponent here has some sort of black smoke cloud that he's playing behind, like right here, and our tanks are right here, then it's going to be very hard for us to get the exact timing right on when his tanks will be out and when they'll be back if we don't have recon here. So if we can get recon in some of these positions, we are going to see that the opponent's tank is back here and it's either moving forward or back through the smoke. And if we want to take the engagements when he moves forward, we move forward. If we don't want to take the engagement when he moves back, is when we move forward. So it's really up to you on what type of engagements you want to take, and having recon in these sorts of areas really helps with that. It also helps you spot AA, so you know if it's okay to go for an ATGM plane, or if it's not okay to go for an ATGM plane. All good sorts of good stuff like that. So now let's say we do our triangle opener. So I'll delete this. Nope, not that color. So, our opponent has like tanks right here. We have our tanks right here. And we do the triangle opener, but the opponent pushes us out. So this did not go well for us, is what happened. The first thing you always want to do when the opener doesn't go south is you want to make sure that you don't lose all of your units. Because if you lose all your units, you're going to get rolled over for the rest of the game. But if you kept your AA and your tanks alive, as much infantry as you could alive, or you traded well with it, then you can reposition, you can rotate. Now, as we'll discuss in a second, it makes sense to have control of Square Forest right here. So, one of the things that you may do is we may take our tanks right here, and either by this path right here, or this path right here, we are going to rotate our tanks into Square Forest. And the idea of this is that we are looking for some sort of head-on fight where the opposition tanks, which are now here, may try to push in like this, and there may be some sort of push like that, but we want to be ready. So this is, in essence, saying that we know our opponent's going to be pushing soon, and by the time we rotate to here, we want our opponent to be rotating into us so that he has to fight for it. And the idea of this strategy here is to stabilize, in essence. Because what we want to do here is after the rotation that we do to the Square Forest locality, so these are no longer here. I'm going to erase all of this. Our opponent's going to have some sort of like tanks here and here, and we will have like tanks here and tanks here. The idea is that we want to stop our opponent's push in, because if our opponent's push gets stopped like this, that gives us room to breathe, and the initiative is reset. And then we can start going into other strategies like attacking alpha, and to apply pressure. Or we could also try to push across like that, if we're careful with it. We have to be very, very careful. And generally, this push across is also accompanied by something here, which we'll talk about in just a second. But if our opponent has stalled, in essence, that gives us the room to either build up our own push for alpha, or if we have, or buy units there and push right away, or build a push to retake Triangle Forest. Now, if we want to retake Triangle Forest and our opponent was stopped, presumably we either traded slightly better than them, or they just ran out of infantry, something of the sort. Now, I know how I just said that when we don't control the vertice, when we only control one vertex, it doesn't make much sense to, in essence, push back into the other one where we are exposed. And that's true. So if we want to push from Square Forest into Triangle Forest, something like that, we have to be very careful to smoke this area right here, smoke for our tanks as well. And as a double precaution, make sure that the distance from here to here um, is great enough so that we have time to react to the ATGMs if the ATGM can reach us at all. Um, it's you have to be very, very precise with your micro. Um, but you can push back into triangle forest from square forest if you do this. You generally also have some sort of units come from here as well, because it's safer to store units there. And you can also have units come down this road. The units that come down this road right here are generally used to come in as a secondary time, while the units in triangle force are distracted. So for example, if we hit everything here with an LRM strike, um, and then we take our tanks in square forest and we start pushing, um, and then we push with our units from this road into triangle, then we're attacking from multiple directions, and that's going to put him in a very awkward position. Now, when coming back into triangle, we have to be very aware of the localities across the river. So that could be our opponent having stuff here, here, and here, and here, potentially. So if we do this, we want to be very careful and have good recon to make sure, oh, my opponent is moving something across the river, or oh, that he has recon on an ATGM team there or something of the sort. And that's going to help us. But if you want to avoid those and you happen to have square forest, you can avoid all of these areas if you mainly push from here. So maybe you push from a little bit from square, and you push a little bit from right here specifically. And if the opponent stalls, you have time to build up and to get a nice organized push going, or you go to alpha. And I'll talk more about alpha once we actually talk about like alpha openers and alpha pushes specifically. But that in essence is what happens if you lose this sort of triangle forest initial engagement. You try to stabilize. If you fail to stabilize, you're going to end up in a position that's kind of sucky, because your opponent will have this, your opponent will have this right here, and your opponent will have this right here. So what that means is that now you really have to make sure to have things here, here, and Bravo will be coming under attack soon. The idea is that you need to stabilize if you can, because if you reach this point quickly, chances are your opponent will probably have the initiative, and you won't be in a position to attack another place. If you don't reach this place quickly, though, and your opponent just happens to have these places, then you can keep on trying to attack Alpha as an option, or you can try to get back into Square Forest. It really just depends upon who has the initiative and what you do. If you don't have the initiative, then your opponent will probably be pushing you, because hopefully they won't be allowing you to build because you're playing a good person. And you'll be reacting to them. If you do have the initiative, though, you have the two options of pushing Alpha or pushing into Square Forest. Now, fortunately for you, it is actually not that hard to push back into Square Forest here. In essence, you kind of take this road right here, and then you just kind of come on in. And if you happen to have units here, you can get some nice firing angles like that as well. A thing to keep in mind, though, is that if your opponent is in this position, they'll almost always have some sort of ATGM in like here. That can reach pretty far. So you have to keep that in mind, and you have to know, in essence, on this road right here, when to turn off. So maybe you turn off like that, or you take something sort of more roundabout way like that into it. But that's in essence how you're going to be taking Square Forest back. It's not that hard, and really, so long as you have a proper build-up of, maybe a tank or two, some infantry, and some sort of high-quality infantry, you'll be able to push up someone out of Square Forest pretty easily. And of course, it always helps if you can hit this with some sort of MLRS. And I'll talk about pushing Alpha 1, so I actually talk about Alpha itself and how to combine these openers and game plans in general. But in essence, that's what you do with your Triangle Forest opener or Triangle Forest attack if it goes south in the opener. So yeah, you always want to try to have Square Forest if you can, because of such how crucial it is for the global strategic perspective. But if you can't control it, you want to get it back, or you want to be applying a lot of pressure elsewhere. And in essence, that's going to be covering the typical Triangle Forest game plans. Um, Having recon here, here, and here is always nice. We know what to do if we win triangle. We know what to do if we lose triangle. We either take back square. We either control square and stall him so we can attack either triangle or alpha. Or if we lose square, we try to take back square or attack an alpha. Now, another way you can also get back in is through the source side area right here. It's harder on this side compared to delta spawn, but in essence, the idea is that if we can put, there we go, a bunch of fire support right here, we can make it very hard for the opponent to store units in this area. And also we know that the side area is clear, and that's going to allow a later attack in like that, along with this assisted. That's more of a strategy that comes into play for Delta side, but you can sort of do it as well with Echo. But yeah, that's how Triangle Forest works. Now let's talk about square strategies. So in the opener, at least, the idea of a square forest strategy is to just give up triangle. You don't want to go. The idea is that you're just not going for this fight because you can't be bothered. You don't have the right type of unit, something like that. But the idea, and you'll see this typically done with like armor decks actually that want to have a slower start, a slower opener. And the idea is that by controlling square, we can very quickly hop over to L Forest and move our infantry up like that. And in essence, this devolves into a situation where we have our tanks in square, they have their tanks in triangle and in here, and it's the same sort of tank fight that we just described earlier. But the difference, as before, is that we're assuming we should have L Forest. And by having L Forest, we now have some interesting opportunities. If we can get guys right here, for example, now our opponent can't use this road. And we know he must be coming through here or through here, which is useful knowledge. Also, by having L Forest, we will get recon really close to any sort of ATGMs in this town right here. So if they shoot, we can spot. And if we have more HE output, more fire support than they do, we'll probably kill the ATGMs quickly, which makes our micro a lot easier. Now, additionally, if we have L Forest, we can also put maybe like a recon tank or something here, and now we have an extra angle, and that's a big deal. It's a kind of tricky way to play, and it does work though. If you do this in the opener, it's typically accompanied with a lot of smoke, with the idea being that you can fully take L Forest. So it looks something like this. If you do this in the opener, we start with this. They start with this. And oops, they also have this right here. The idea, in essence, is that there's going to be a lot of smoke if you do this in the opener or something like that. And if the opponent's units are sort of stranded here, then you have to rotate like that around. And hopefully in that time you can gain full control of L Forest. In which case, you now have a tank fight where you're trying to go for this town block right here. And if you can take that, so this becomes yours, then all the units right here are stranded. And that's not that hard to retake. Now, obviously, because we're very exposed when we do this, and we don't start with Square Forest. We don't start with the Golf Town from this side. That's what I meant to say. It's risky. I don't think I've ever seen this in ranked. I've by someone else. I've done it like once or twice and it's worked, but it's more of a surprise weapon to just kind of confuse your opponent. Um, it's hard to pull off though, and it's something that's more gonna it's something that's less of an opener strat and more of a later game strat that happens frequently. Um, and if this doesn't work, you in essence return to that situation that we had in the Triangle Forest opener, but where you in essence lost Triangle Forest from the start. Now the problems with sitting in Square Forest for a long time is that it's so small. This is the perfect size for MLRS. So if you just sit here and you don't really do much, you don't apply pressure or anything like that, what's going to happen is this is going to get hit by MLRS and you're just going to get pushed out. So you need to be applying some sort of pressure to your opponent. And maybe that is the alpha attack, which we'll talk about in a second. Or maybe it's trying to do this type of thing here, or this thing around here like that. Either way, you don't want to be staying in a square force for too long, because if you just kind of chill there, you're in a very obvious position for MLRS, and someone could also just do defensive MLRS there instead of offensive MLRS. And you'll be in kind of a dicey situation at that point. Square Force openers are typically done, like pure Square Force openers are typically done with armor decks. If you have a deck that's more flexible than an armor deck, what you also try to do is you really try to gain control of these areas right here. Because if you control this now, then when you actually want to attack it back into Triangle Forest, we now can cut off potentially ways of retreating, and we have recon and many ways of attacking. So the factory town becomes more important when we're not becomes a lot more important for actually getting back in and allowing us to use this road right here later on. So yeah, that's Square Forest attack in essence. And the last one we haven't talked about is Alpha. So, in my opinion, and I know people will disagree with this, with Alpha, it is absolutely crucial to hold Square Forest. Because when you push Alpha, either in the opener or late game, and you don't have Square Forest, your opponent will respond really in one of two ways. Sorry, if you do have Square Forest, your opponent will respond in one of two ways. They'll either try to go through here, or they'll try to stop you and then push in like this, how we talked earlier. If you omit the Square Forest step, so in fact they actually do have Square Forest, rather than pushing into Square Forest, the idea is that they can push here to cut you off. So now they can control this area and this area, and then they can also execute this top portion right here to contain you, and now you're stuck between two fronts, one coming this way, one coming that way. So any sort of forces that you have here are gone. So when you don't control Square Forest and you do Alpha Push, you have to be very, very aware that this sort of counterattack from Square Forest is a possibility, and if it succeeds, you more or less probably lost the game, or against a skilled opponent, you'll have lost the game. Against a bad opponent, it's a dice roll, because everyone who's bad is going to miss micro so much. So, with that in mind, that's why if I open Alpha or I do the Alpha or I will attack Alpha, I really want to have Square Forest. Because now when I go like that, and I have some sort of units right here, the idea is that the map is going to look something like, not quite like that, but it's going to look something like this. And that's a lot better as opposed to this. Because what that means is that if we're just talking CVs, I get this CV, and maybe this CV. I'm going to put a bar over it just to show it's iffy. So I have these zones right here. My opponent will have here, they'll have here, and they'll have here, presumably. Um, oh, and I will also have here as well. So Foxtrot is going to cancel out. The 2-pointer will cancel out. And then my opponent will have golf. And I might have alpha. It can be very hard to put a CV in there later in the game if you don't have a lot of control. So what this means is that if my opponent can get a CV into alpha, for example, then these cancel out as well, like that. And now I'm not ticking. And not only am I not ticking, but my opponent can always has this option of counterattacking some sort of way. However, if I have square forest, I put a CV here. This zone gets crossed out. And now I'm ticking at least +1. And that's a good thing, obviously speaking. So having square forest, even from the perspective of a tick, is really useful. And from the perspective of just general strategic initiatives, the global strategy of having square forest does not permit our opponent to actually attack into Bravo or Charlie. It makes that a lot harder. So that's a good thing. And that's why with alpha, I personally always want something in square forest. You will see people who open alpha and they just kind of go all in balls to the walls like this. And they leave this open. So, my opponent gets this, they get this, they come through here, and they can either come like that. And I don't like that. So, at least in my personal opinion, it is very important to actually control square force if you do some sort of alpha attack. Or if you don't control square force, be very aware that defending against this arrow right here is something you need to be doing. So, as far as the alpha attack actually goes, we do our normal thing right here. And we have to really keep in mind the local strategy of, hey, my opponent gets here a lot faster than I do. So one of two things can really happen. If your opponent has forces in like triangle or golf, if they decide to rotate back around to do something like that, and you have alpha, they will probably push you out at some point. And the reason why alpha openers, specifically openers, are hard is because you have to recognize when you're getting pushed out and know, okay, it's time to rotate my units through here that I already control. And then because triangle and golf town will be more empty, to attack like this. And then the idea is that alpha is, in these sort of alpha openers, alpha is this big distraction, and when the opponent retakes alpha like that, the idea is that we're going to have Bravo, and then we're going to have golf, and then that right there is like a +2, +1 depending on if they depending on if they actually CV Bravo up. And then if we have these areas, we can always devolve back into re-pushing alpha again to continue to apply pressure. Because it's like the only place we can actually apply pressure, assuming we're not like putting things in his spawn. So that's alpha for you. You have to be very aware on when to leave and when to cause this big distraction to push somewhere else. Now, it also is potentially the case that your opponent will rotate their units into alpha. They will try to attack or try to retake alpha. They'll get part of it, and then they'll feed a bunch of units, or they'll fizzle out, or something like that. That's in essence going to result in a situation that looks like this. We have Bravo. We have Square. Our opponent will probably have something like this, and we will have maybe this town here, and in yellow, this is either or. So we'll end up in a situation that looks like this. Um, if their attack fizzled, that gives us the opportunity to build. It's not very good penmanship. There you go. To build into square forest, because presumably these areas will be lighter defended. And by building here, we can then attack like that. And you have to be, so that's why alpha's hard. You have to be very aware of how you're trading and have good game sense to do it. And to know, to be able to also micro two fronts at once. Because if you just keep on sending units in alpha, and they keep on sending units in alpha, and the trade is relatively even, eventually you'll get pushed out. And you may get pushed back to your spawn if you completely overextended. So you have to keep that in mind for alpha. So those are, from this side at least, the three main openers. We got triangle, we got square, and we got alpha. And we just understand the game plans with them. Triangle, we want with triangle we hope to have triangle and square to take Golf Town, then to move to alpha. With square we try to get L Forest, and then triangle or Golf Town depending on what's happening. And then for alpha we play this game of being very aware of the KD and knowing when to rotate, so that we're not overextending. And if Paddy was just 3 openers and that was it, it would be kind of boring. That title belongs to the other map called Mudfight, which is boring. In this map, though, we can also do split openers. And that's where things get interesting. So the split opener from this side, in essence, well, before I actually talk about them specifically, a split opener is, in essence, is saying, I'm going to do triangle and square, or I'm going to do triangle and alpha, or square and alpha, but that's kind of the default. Really, though, you're splitting between triangle and either square or alpha. It just depends on which strategy you choose. Now, obviously, because we get square forest at the start from Echo Spawn, we should be sending things to square forest like an ATGM and some recon. But the split opener towards square is a bigger allocation of our points. So we're distributing our forces across 2 areas instead of 1, in essence. And the idea behind that is we're going to hold this line right here. We're not going to try to be too aggressive here, where our opponent is, unless we can get some amazing picks. And while this is happening, we can try to do some sort of fancy things in here, and then push them out completely, because we'll control all 3 vertices at that point. That's the idea behind the triangle square split. We can also do the triangle alpha split. And the idea is to have very, very light investments in square, because you probably won't be able to invest all that much here. And the idea here is that our tanks are going to be fighting here, and if we can be aggressive on him, great. But also, by pushing up alpha like this as well, what we will in essence be doing is forcing our opponent to have some sort of reaction to here. And he has to spend a lot of points to do that, to get us out. Of course, if we fail our initial attack, because our opponent has a helicopter or just better moto stuff than us, then we're out of a lot of points and our 2-pointer is completely open, and that's a problem. But the idea is that if we control alpha with minimal forces, and then we really focus on the triangle forest fight, like all of our stuff, the worst case scenario is that we lose triangle forest, but we keep most of our units alive, and then we go into square forest like this. But now all of a sudden we also control alpha. And that's a big difference, because when we control alpha in this place, or at least a part of alpha, our attack into alpha is accelerated. We can potentially deny a CV or counter CV. Um, and also, our opponent is still going to be on the back foot because we have more zones than they do. Now, in the best case scenario of our triangle forest stuff here works, then our opponent's just shit out of luck because they have this, and that's about it. So if we take Golf Town, then we are accelerating already into the sort of alpha attack that we had earlier. And because of this, like strategically, if it works, it's great. But of course, it's going to be harder to micro because you're trying to do two local strategies in two localities. Um, and if you screw up in the alpha area, for example, now you have to invest a lot of points in Bravo. And we also don't know how they are opening. Which is why like having a recon helo on this map specifically is really important. And then we can also split like square and alpha. If we send the majority of our forces into alpha like this and enough in square to hold square, it's just an alpha opener. However, we can also turn it around. We can also have enough forces in alpha to take it with a minimal amount, and then most of our forces in square. And this specifically is a good counter to slower decks that are going to be more tank heavy. Like, let's say, for example, you are playing something like Moto. Well, it changes a bit when you're doing Moto, but let's say you're playing something like Eurocore. And you're playing against something big and heavy like Commonwealth or some sort of armor deck like Red Armor, Entente Armor, something like that. Um, those decks aren't going to be moving that fast, but the idea is that if we have a majority of our forces here, we can now take this tank fight, and we have time to reinforce Alpha and to hopefully trade equal with them. So now our opponent with their slower deck that's going to be less effective multi-fronting now has to multi-front here and here. Because if they don't want multi-front in Golf, we take Golf Town and then we focus on Alpha. If they don't multi-front in Alpha, we can just fully take Alpha and start sneaking things into our spawn. So they're forced to react to this. From the Moto player perspective, it's a little bit different if you play Moto because you're doing more of a full push towards Alpha than you would if you were playing Unspec. But the idea is they're either, if they rotate into Square Forest, because I see you're playing Moto, you have like high AT infantry and more forces than they would expect here. So they're going to rotate like double Gurkhas, for example, or they're going to rotate into Panzer Yakari or whatever, or Legion 90, a lot more stuff, and a lot more AMX-10. So that's going to be surprising for them. And that's what happens if they rotate into Square. And if they rotate instead over to here, then what we do is, because we already have a full force composition in Square Forest, the idea here then is we retake Golf Town quickly, and there won't be anything of threat in here if they fully rotate. So this area right here, Triangle Forest, will be neutral, more or less, not really worth caring about all that much. And then what will most likely happen is we'll probably have to come back down if we get pushed out super hard, or we can try to really hold this by going for this town right here, and maybe these areas right here to get this town as well. But that's how the sort of square alpha split opener looks from the Moto perspective. And that's kind of it. This sort of side area right here really comes into play of controlling this open area and getting recon, and maybe we'll get back in later on. But yeah, that's kind of the main strategies from Echo that people choose from. And they will all work quite well. Like me personally, I really, really like the alpha openers. Because like when I design an alpha opener, one thing I'll do if I'm playing with like tanks, for example, is I'll have a tank on this road as well, and if I see that they're going to be rotating, I can pop my tank up like that and hopefully get some side shots in this area. Or if they're not rotating, I now have a tank to deal with their forces that are pushing in like this, along with all of my stuff in Square Forest. And then if I also have a tank coming up here, so like maybe 200 points of tanks total, I can now deal with things here effectively. So yeah, that's kind of the echo side for how things roll, um, from the sort of global strategic perspective. Now, let's flip the script. Delta. So, in my opinion at least, the Delta side is a lot more dynamic than Echo side, simply because our Square Forest openers aren't as passive. Um, Obviously, like Echo side is really fun to play. I really enjoy playing both Echo and Delta for different reasons. But I really enjoy Delta side. I think more depending on the day, which is kind of a non-answer. The more I think about it, so that sort of tangent non sequitur thingamajigger aside, um, let's talk about Delta, and we'll start with the Triangle Forest. So right off the bat, we get this. And that's important for us because ATGM here, ATGM here, it makes it, he has to actually micro stuff. The whole point of our Triangle Forest attack, as I earlier mentioned, is to take the Triangle Forest, push his tank, and then push his tanks out of here. Now, in doing such, in the opener specifically, there are two roads we can choose from. We have the road in yellow, and we have the road in black. Because you are players who are not completely new, you should know, or I hope you know rather, that the yellow road is the moto road and the black road is the mech road. Or wheeled, tracked, whatever. It doesn't matter how you phrase it. The idea of the yellow road here is with the opener timing specifically, we can take triangle and contest it, and it makes our mechs attack a lot easier. Post opener, at any point, it is very hard to take the moto road in because if our opponent, sorry, I actually used the wrong colors here. Because if our opponent has Square Forest like that, they will have an ATGM right here, and they will hit the moto road. So we can't really use this moto road post opener unless if we are being very careful to eliminate the ATGMs, very careful of enemy tanks like right here, and also probably smoking here as well. And at least for me, that's a lot of work. All for this one push. So post opener, the pushes you typically do into Triangle Forest are with the mech road right here, rather than the motor road. But in the opener, the motor road is very useful because it really allows us to hold Triangle Forest, and potentially apply a lot of pressure when our opponent's not expecting it, or in conjunction with our tank pressure to my opponent's tanks right in this area and drive them out. So, how does this work? Well, our tanks are going to, our tanks are going to be like here or something like that, and we try to push through here. Let's assume that we take Triangle Forest, and we are awesome like that. Now, sorry about that. So we have this area, and we control Triangle Forest. Now, the game we play is connect the dots, and because we have these two vertices right here, and we have our triangle that we formed, and we sort of engage in this like this is a classic example, in my opinion, of engaging in the three-step plan of controlling, of basically attacking new places. The first step in this plan is to consolidate the ground that you've won. So that means like buying, that basically means like replacing, for like speaking about it very crudely, replacing offensive units with defensive ones. So we're buying new units like Recon and ATGMs to hold Foxtrot. So if we can put like an ATGM here, great. ATGM here, great. And here as well. That's all good. Because that's going to make it now harder for our opponent to actually push back in. And if we have Recon, we can also spot their push, presumably. So once that is accomplished, our next step is to repair the units that were damaged in our initial assault, and then to buy new units for the actual assault that we're going to be attacking next, which in this case is Square Force because we're just connecting the dots. So maybe we buy some more infantry, some like fodder, or some high quality infantry to push into Square Forest. Maybe we buy supply trucks, more recon, more tanks, whatever. And the last step is to actually attack. And then I find that following this three-step plan is a pretty good thing. So, in this position right here, we just play the game of connected dots into Square Forest, and we take Square Forest. Like that. You do have to be aware that your opponent will have ATGMs right here in this building block. When you push across the open like this, so being very careful with your smoke to avoid planes and ATGMs is important. Now, let's just say that we are awesome and our Square Forest push works. Now we have Square Forest. What this means is that our opponent no longer has this angle right here that we mentioned earlier. So, if we want to attack the lower part of Dick Forest, we're in luck. Because now we have it here, 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 and here. And that's sort of our general game plan. And if we take Dick Forest, then we are super awesome, and we basically won the game at that point because we can get a +3 on them. We'll countercop Foxtrot, and then we'll get 1 Bravo, Golf, and Alpha for a +3. Now, sometimes we're not so awesome, and sometimes our attacks don't work. So, let's start off with what happens if our Triangle Force attack doesn't work. So the resulting situation will be something like this right here, and maybe we fed some tanks or something like that. Or our tanks got too damaged. So now this is what the situation looks like. And because I just mentioned this from the other side, we know what our opponent will be doing. Our opponent will probably be trying to attack Golf Town. They don't have to necessarily. They can choose to attack Alpha instead. But if you can control Golf Town, that's always very nice. So there are a couple things we can do. If we didn't feed tanks, but we still have some tanks, we can try to rebuild over here, something like that, and we can try to do this attack again. Keep in mind that the more times you attack a position, repeated attacks, the greater the chance of you failing is, because your opponent will be reinforcing those positions. But we can do that. If we fail here super hard, we can try to launch a very quick attack down through here. The idea being that if we attack fast enough through here and into Bravo, the idea is that they probably won't be able to put scary units like M84ANs, IMX-10s, Verkennings into Square Forest that can necessarily take advantage of this line of sight right here. And because we'll be playing this very dynamically, if we lose Triangle Forest and we're actually trying to attack down Bravo, we won't be able to use all 4 of our routes. So we probably won't have this one. And we may have this one right here. Because we will be holding this in the opener. So we're really just going to have either this yellow one or this blue one right here. And then we'll probably have this blue one going down to the right
into Bravo. And the idea is that if we have a lot of Bravo pressure going on, our opponent is forced to do something. They're either forced to react into Bravo, um, or they're forced to react into Gulf Town. If they react into Gulf Town, hopefully we can defend it with tanks and our ATGMs and tanks, and maybe some ATGM planes as well. If they react into Bravo, then the idea is that they'll hopefully overspend their points there, so that we can pull our forces out. Sorry, not in yellow. We can pull our forces out, rotate all the way back, and build our attack into here again. It's a very dynamic way to play. If they overinvest, that is. If we can see that we're actually going to be winning this fight potentially, we just try to outtrade them to get a little bit better KD, which will make the rest of our life easier. But that is an idea on what we can do. We'll talk about what happens if you lose Gulf in a second, because taking back Gulf is just really hard. Now, let's just say that we have Gulf Town, our triangle force attack worked. We have this part right here. We tried to attack Square Forest, but that didn't work. Well, it always helps to get recon into this position right here to really spot into Square Forest. And then we can do a couple things. We can try again at some point, assuming we didn't feed massively. So, our micro was good enough. Or we can maybe try to do something over here like this, with these three positions. And the idea here is that if we control Bravo, and we have triangle force like that, it's not that hard to control this right here. And now all of a sudden we have this angle, and this angle, and this angle right here. And now defending Square Forest for the Echo player is very hard. And it's going to be very hard for them to actually leave Square Forest, let alone do anything sort of offensive, because we can also hit from this side right here. So that's the idea, of course. In essence, what we're doing is actually telling you, or rather what I'm doing is I'm actually telling you how to attack another place when your attack fails, and to how to constantly be applying pressure, and hopefully you're not feeding. That's the important thing. And the last thing to talk about is we have triangle. We have this. We have this. We have this right here. But our attack into here did not work. At this point, the response we do is pretty simple. You just keep on trying for Bravo, hopefully not feeding, but you make sure to get a big tick going. Like, you should always... I haven't really been mentioning CV buys very frequently, if at all, so far. But here, if our attack fails, it's important to make sure that we're not going to get counterattacked, and then to get a CV. Because now, if we have CV of 1, 2, 3 of our +1s, and our opponent has here and here, and presumably we can also have this one as well. So that's going to be a +2. So the idea is that we'll be applying tick pressure, because we are taking +2, +1, something like that. And not only that, we'll be applying positional pressure as well on Bravo by constantly attacking it and harassing him. But yeah, that's in essence what can happen with a Triangle Forest opener here. Now, one of my favorite openers in this game period from Delta side is the Square Force opener. The idea is that I think this was actually developed first by Putin. I could be wrong though. But with Putin, he was not able to do the Triangle Force opener good enough for his standards against Razman, so he wanted some sort of other way to apply pressure. So what he did is he developed the sort of Square Force opener, with the idea being that you take Square Force in the opener, and you end up in this sort of position, which is very different. The way this is done in the opener, at least, is there's mechanized units coming down this road, and then down through here, and out like that. while motorized units, which I'll put in yellow, come around the edge like that. The timing here is such that the motor units can get into square forest perfectly fine from this road and not get shot at, while the mech units, if they take this moto path in yellow, would get shot at. So we'd go down this little ledge right in this area right here specifically. And the idea here is that once we control square forest, we have a really amazing position. And that's because our opponent's forces that are right here are now potentially stranded, depending on what we do, of course. We now have really two options. Option number one is we can sort of do another attack into triangle like this, right here, to retake triangle. And then if we have square and triangle, it devolves into the previous situation that we've already talked about, so I'm not going to mention it again. Option number two, though, is rather than attack triangle, we instead attack the two-pointer. And the way we attack the two-pointer is we now push Bravo like this. Because if our opponent has a lot of forces in triangle right here, they're not going to have that many in Bravo. So we can like kind of walk some guys across maybe, and then buy some units for Bravo and have this big hit and keep on going down this road right here. The reason why this actually works is because with the opponent's forces in triangle now, they can't really take Gulf Town like this, because we can always move our tanks over to here to get side shots if they do, and they have to deal with square forest, which means they'll be coming sort of like this, more or less. And that's really interesting because if we can make sure that this arrow right here never happens or is weak enough, that doesn't matter. All these forces in triangle have to now rotate to do anything. So I have to go all the way out here, all the way around like that. And that's a lot of time in which we can attack Bravo and start applying 2-point pressure. And that's why this opener works and why it's so flexible. Because we can choose to go to the 2-pointer / Bravo, or we can choose to go to triangle. The reason why this opener is hard is because of the size of square forest. So here's square forest, here's triangle, and here's Gulf Town. If we just sit in square forest and we're very passive for too long, terrible, horrible things can happen. Because square forest is exactly the size of MLRS. So that if we sit here, our opponent gets to build up, and now they can push like this, and if they have forces in Bravo, like that as well. So if we sit here doing nothing, we're just going to throw the game. And that's a big problem. Because, losing is bad, winning is good. Winner POV and all that. But yeah, that's the idea of the square forest push. It will either turn into the triangle forest opener, or it will turn into what we'll talk about next, which is the Bravo opener. Now, the Bravo opener is one that I personally did not like all that much until now. I'm okay with it now. I still don't really like it a ton. But the idea of the Bravo opener is we send units down this road right here, and this road right here, to occupy Bravo. And we want to make sure that we hold this sort of Gulf Town. By holding Gulf Town right here and occupying Bravo, the idea is that if we have a fast deck, like a moto deck or something like that, we can try to immediately apply pressure into the 2-pointer. And if our opponent has square forest like this, and they didn't invest all that much here, we might very quickly be able to get into this town block. And in essence, the idea is that say that, okay, you have square forest, you have triangle forest, but I have your 2-pointer, and I'm going to deny you the CV and tick really quickly on you. And if you do this correctly, you can close out a game very quickly. The problem with this opener just has to do with that pushing down into Bravo can, at least initially, it can be very tricky depending on how many forces your opponent actually has. If your opponent has a lot of forces in Bravo and you try to push down, you may lose everything. So you may have to rotate and do another opener potentially. If your opponent, if this is mid game, then you're in essence just pushing down Dick Forest, and you have to actually build up the force composition and distribution much more appropriately. So mid game is very different than just late game. But this is the idea of the sort of Bravo to Charlie attack. And in attacking Charlie, a couple things can happen. If we fully take Charlie and Charlie is ours, we in essence just win the game after we make sure our spawn's not getting pushed. And then we're okay. What will more often than not happen, though, is we'll push Charlie, our opponent will have forces coming here already, they'll be in Charlie, and we have no chance of getting in. And at that point we have to make a decision. The decision that we have to make is, do we keep on trying to apply pressure, in which most of the time the answer is no, because that's going to be a lot of feeding potentially, or do we attack somewhere else? And in the case of attacking somewhere else, it really depends on what your opponent does. If your opponent has a lot of stuff in Square Forest, then Triangle Forest presumably will be a bit more empty. And that's going to allow us to maybe do a quick little triangle attack with a small little force composition where we go like that and we take this like that. If our opponent has a lot of units in Triangle Forest, though, maybe the call is to rotate like that into Square Forest before they can get set. And then we have Square Forest like that, and then we can retake Triangle eventually, and we end up in this very nice position, is the idea. So when you do these Bravo, Charlie openers and these Square Forest openers, in essence, non-Triangle Forest openers from the Delta side, you really have to keep in mind that you have to be playing very flexibly. And you can't get too much in love with some sort of strategy, because it'll probably fall apart if you insist upon it upon first contact. Now, what I've been neglecting to say this whole entire time is the role of Factory Town here. When we do a Square Forest opener or a Bravo opener, it's always a good idea to send something into here. Because if we control this area, that means we no longer have to worry about this right here getting zoned out, and that's always a good thing. And then it also means that maybe we can start storing units here to come in across the road. And if we happen to attack Triangle Forest at the same time, or well, as we have our tanks right here, or some fire support right here to go across the road, across the river, sorry, then we have a much stronger attack. Overall, though, like Factory Town is very useful from this side for getting back into Triangle Forest and for denying the opponent the ability to get back into Triangle Forest. So with that being said and done, it now makes sense to talk about split openers. And while the field of just like pure openers, if you will, of Delta is much more rich in my opinion, because we have Bravo, a more aggressive Square, and Triangle, the split openers aren't quite as rich. And the reason why is that when we're doing our sort of triangle attack right here, so we have this, I'll put this in yellow because we don't know who it belongs to. Our opponent has this right here, and we have this. We need a lot of units to actually attack Triangle. And the reason why is just because the local strategy dictates, as we discussed, that these positions right here, super strong. And we just need a lot, we just need a lot of forces to take this. So if we go Triangle, it's more often than not very difficult to do some sort of split opener with Triangle involved. So any sort of split opener where we're on the Gulf side of the map is less putting things in Triangle and more about investing a significant enough number of forces in this area to do what you want to do. So really, the one split opener that you tend to really see that doesn't involve stuff across the river is the square forest Bravo split like that. And this is probably equally as common, excuse me, equally as common with the actual square forest opener itself. Because the idea is that if we control this right here, and we control this square forest right here as well, then potentially we can accelerate the attack into the two-pointer without having to clear this out right away. And that's a big deal. And that's a significant advantage that this split opener has over the more traditional pure square force opener. So yeah, that's really the one main split opener that you'll see. And it makes sense because when you split into this area right, when you split into this area right here, you also remove potential side shots from your tank, which is a good thing. And it allows you to attack in the two-pointer quicker. So yeah, that's always a nice thing. When you split onto this side of the map right here, you're in essence really trying to attack Charlie hard, and if things go south, you have the ability to get back in a triangle quicker, is the idea. But yeah, those are the main strategies that you'll see on Paddy, and at least to me, it is quite evident from the lengthy discussion of local strategy that we had about why these are the strategies that we can choose from and why certain other ones like pushing hotel or whatever don't really work that well, and why we just tend not to do that all that much. Because the video is already pretty long, I'm not going to like include examples or anything like that because it'll be like a 4 or 5 hour video and my voice can't hold out that long, and I would not want to watch a 4 or 5 hour video. I think this length is stretching it. So I'm just going to end it here because this is just purely theory based. And I think that even if you disagree with my global strategies but you like the local ones, I think I've given you enough tools to build your own openers and enough tools to build your own late game plans and how to actually move from game plan to game plan as the game dynamically changes and your opponents do unexpected things in either a good or a bad way. Hey there, this is the Lord Pi of the future who just realized that the Lord Pi of the past is an idiot because he forgot to talk about opener timings and what they kind of look like. So the first thing I just want to show you is top this alpha opener timing here for why the alpha opener from Echo Side actually works. And to do that, I'm just going to get a couple of Moto and mech units like this, and some Moto and mech units like this right over here. I'm just going to fast move them at, in essence, the exact same time at bullet time, so faster than you can react, to a point alpha. I have the Recon AMX-10 on the road or close enough to it, and then the Tank Tab AMX-10 and the Leopard 2A1 on this little corner path right here. And then here, these guys are just going to fast move up. So I'm going to select all three. I'm going to fast move to here. And I'm going to select the 2A1 and the AMX-10. And I'm going to fast move to here. And let's see what happens. So we'll speed it up a little bit, so we're not waiting here for ages. And hopefully we won't get any crits. And let's slow down about now. So you can see that this town is actually a lot more contested than it would appear, because this AMX-10 comes up in just in time to hit things coming into the town. And that's a big deal. So the Moto stuff is going to all be here at just enough the right time. Let's check the mech timing. So my mech unit went through the forest here. This was almost up the road. And you can see that we can hit him before he actually gets to the town with our mech stuff. And these were all started in essence the same time. So this is why this alpha town right here can actually be contested in the opener. Now, a thing to keep in mind, as what I said earlier, is that if you try to push up the plateau in the opener, um, and your opponent is trying to push down the plateau, the person pushing up is going to lose most of the time because they're popping up off of this little ramp right here, one at a time, and you could have a helicopter or a bunch of tanks on their side you don't know. So yeah, this is the first timing into alpha. Now, let's look at the triangle forest timings. So here I have some recon AMX 10s. I have a tank, another recon tank, and an actual tank. And here for triangle, I have a mech and a moto unit. Alright. I'm also going to be moving the stuff in square forest at the start. Just one of the AMX 10s. Just to show you what the timing looks like for actually getting to this area right here. So let's go to bullet time. I'm going to take the tank tab AMX 10. The tank tab AMX 10 is going to drive into triangle forest. And then the recon AMX 10 and the leopard 2-1s are going to take the mech road, as I had talked about earlier. Now over here, I'm going to have the recon, sorry, not the recon, the AMX 10 drive all the way over to here, and the leopard 2A1 drive all the way to here. And finally, for this recon AMX 10, I'm going to have it just drive over right to here specifically. And let's check out the timings. So right away you can see that the motor road gets here just in time for infantry to unload and to start aiming their ATGMs. And if we have an AMX 10 here, we could probably get a side shot. And now you can see here how we get to the triangle forest first before the mech stuff. And how, this is what the timing sort of looks like. Now the next thing just to kind of show you is the timing for going into this town right here and units coming from this road around this road over here. So, let's move our units a little bit closer. And let's stop that one right there. Have this one get ready to go. And this one ready to go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to send the 2A1 down this mech road right here. Sorry, down the motor road, excuse me. Just to show you that the timing is not going to be good even for units right here. I'm going to send the tank tab AMX 10 into this building block right here. And I'm going to send the recon AMX 10 into triangle forest. So, the tank goes down the motor road. The tank AMX 10 goes into the building. And the recon AMX 10 goes into triangle forest. Now here, this AMX 10 is going to wrap all the way around over to here. And this tank is going to wrap all the way around over to here as well. So, let's see what happens. And again, everyone started at basically the same point. And let's go a bit to normal speed now. So you can see that most of the time, unless you're playing as like something like a Roy Cat, you should get to this town first, every single time. However, if we just stop this here, you can see that if we send stuff down the mech road, the motor road, that's mech, we immediately get side shot. And we may even run into problems with mech stuff coming down this road as well, potentially. Of course, it very much depends on the timing. But yeah, right here, you can see that had we actually started advance further, we would have hit this 2A1 on the side. So that's that timing. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for watching this far. Give me some comments for feedback, and I will take them. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't. Helps me know if I'm doing good things or not. Anyway, take care. Bye.